Welcome to the Rimworld DLC rundown. We'll be taking a quick-ish look at what you can expect to see from Odyssey. First off, as well as this video including a full explanation of all of the new parts, mechanics and interactions that you can expect to see with Odyssey, it's also packing a short review towards the end of it. I'll do all of the explanation stuff first so that hopefully when it comes time to review things and explain my thoughts, you'll have a better sense of how I ended up there. I'll do my best to keep this as short and concise as possible as well, otherwise this video could end up being really long. Foreshadowing is a literary device So, what do we get with Odyssey? Here's the tricky part. Your mileage with this DLC is going to vary based on what other content you already own, if any. You're looking at new biomes, map types, landmarks, plants, animals, quests, factions, materials, weapons, equipment, armor, structures, and associated research to unlock all of it. You get a Xenotype if you're using Biotech, a meme if you're using Ideology. There are fresh mechanoid threats, there's an entire orbital layer that generates above the planet with unique places to visit, there's more world map transport options, and the jewel in the crown of this expansion comes in the form of a Gravship. And of course, the many new playstyles that will support. The strangest part when covering this DLC to me is that, on paper at least, if you tried to compare this to things like Biotech or Anomaly side by side, there are less new parts that you will make use of as a player. And I mean that going by raw numbers of what you can build, research and equip. The Odyssey Architect tab has a total of 14 structures for you to build, with all of it being locked behind just 5 bits of tech. Whilst that might make Odyssey initially appear somewhat simple, maybe even a little bit underwhelming, it's potentially one of the hardest DLCs to explain to a new player, and I'm certain that it's going to have tripped up a few seasoned veterans with its new mechanics too, because that's where the depth of Odyssey lies. We know that we have a lot to break down here and plenty of stuff to get through, with the Gravship and Orbital layer obviously being the biggest topics to go over. So we're going to put those on hold for now and cover the easier sections first, as it's going to help give more context to the interactions with those parts later on. Let's go with the features you'll be getting that are dependent on owning other DLC first. It lets us get the underwhelming crossover episode out of the way nice and early. If you're pairing Odyssey with Biotech, you will get the Starjack, a bold, bright white skinned Xenotype with prominent facial ridges. This is, as with most vanilla Xenotypes, very straightforward in what it does. It comes in with a good temperature tolerance, though they prefer to stay indoors when possible. Starjacks have a greatly improved construction ability at the cost of awful mining, animals and plants, as well as a reduced melee skill and halved melee damage. So whilst the only tool that they have any familiarity with is a hammer, they struggle in treating another living being as if it was a nail. The new part to Odyssey here is the vacuum resistance gene, which provides 45% resistance. While I won't be going over that mechanic just yet, it's a topic far better suited for the Gravship and space section, just know that this offset alone is doing more work than wearing a standard vac suit, meaning Starjacks can survive in space with just a helmet on. They have no need to wear the full outfit. They may still get just a little bit of hypothermia if they spend too long outside of the ship wearing a button down and pants though. Their temperature tolerances aren't quite that powerful.
Got a little dippy going too fast out here.
So that was the Xenotype for Biotech. What about Ideology? You'll be getting the shipborne meme to play with, which is considered medium impact. It forces 4 presets and it conflicts with the Undergrounder trait, although that isn't going to make it completely incompatible with something like the Tunneler meme. It's just going to be quite specific in what you need to use with that exact pairing. Your 4 requirements are indoors being preferred, which is going to flip your outdoor need, to try and keep colonists away from things like grass and natural light. They now prefer solid walls and sheet metal flooring beneath their feet. Nutrient paste is set to don't mind, so you won't get a mood debuff for eating the mystery soup anymore. Temperature tolerances are raised to tough, meaning no mood debuffs for sleeping in the cold or the heat. Just remember that this preset doesn't give you any additional degrees of comfort in regards to high or low temperatures though. You can still get hypothermia just as easily if you're bedding down in a minus 75 degree environment. Finally, there is space habitat preferred. As long as you're living planet-side, regardless of what you actually live in, be that a Gravship or a house, you're going to have a constant -2 to mood. Once you're up amongst the stars, this turns into a +4 mood buff, thanks to living in a space habitat. Again, this could involve living aboard a grav ship, or establishing a space colony, or taking over an abandoned platform. It's a relatively simple meme, all things considered, with the mood offsets it applies being largely negligible.
Oh, I'm fine. It's just that life is pointless and nothing matters, and I'm always tired. Also, I can't sleep. I'm overeating. None of my old hobbies interest me.
Now, those aren't the only DLC integrations, but they're the easiest things to cover in a standalone section. With simplicity in mind, let's do a pretty major inclusion that's very straightforward. The new biomes, tile landmarks, and the map features system. You're going to get a lot of fresh, interesting places to go and live or visit with Odyssey, greatly improving upon the reason to leave your home tile and actually interact with the world map more frequently. You still have a lot of the familiar biomes to play in, as nothing's been replaced, so you can still expect to see forests, swamps, shrublands, deserts, bogs, tundra, and ice sheets. With Odyssey, you're also going to be getting the Glowforest, Scarlands, Grasslands, Glacial Plains, and Lava Fields. These vary pretty dramatically in where they fall on the difficulty scale, so we'll go from what I personally consider the easiest to the hardest. Of course, that is always subject to change based on your starting scenario or your initial colonists, so chill your beans before you get pedantic in the comments about how you disagree with this ordering. We'll start with the Grasslands biome. These typically generate around the equator of the planet, so you're normally rolling with a year-round or at worst a 50-60 growing period. Grasslands will typically see more rainfall than something like a temperate forest, whilst being less miserable than a rainforest. They also come with a fairly average amount of fertile soil to play with too. The difficult part about living in the Grasslands is the total lack of steam geysers for geothermal generators and a naturally low density of trees or harvestable plants. This is somewhat offset by the large amount of yellow grass that's constantly growing, making it really easy to ranch animals as your pasture areas will always be well catered for without you needing to lift a finger, and as well as that, the biome rarely generates with large hills, let alone anything resembling a mountain. So you have a huge amount of flat, unobstructed and stable terrain to build upon, making building a renewable energy farm with a huge battery shed really easy to do, especially thanks to the increased chances of breezy weather that's going to make your wind turbines extra efficient. What are the risks of living in this biome then? The temperature is pretty stable, so whilst it can get a little bit sweaty in the peak of summer, a few good stone walls, a cooler or two, and some adjoining vents is going to keep your entire colony comfortable. You're also going to want to build out of stone as soon as possible because this biome is a literal tinderbox. Whilst the density of the grass is useful for ranching, it's a nightmare in dry thunderstorms if you've got pyromaniac colonists or if there's a heart attack prone boomerlope. All in all, it's pretty straightforward, probably landing somewhere around an arid shrubland or a boreal forest. You have easier temperatures to play with than both of those biomes, but lack many of the natural resources that make the other two easier to survive in. Once you're up and running, the Grasslands is absolutely fine. It can just be a little bit harder to find that initial footing.
You're gonna burn down the school and kill everyone!
Fire can't go through doors, stupid. It's not a ghost.
Next up is the Glowforest, and whilst I really wanted to love this biome, it feels like a bit of a misstep for a couple of reasons. Firstly, from what I've noticed playing on this biome compared to everything else, the tick rate is kinda god awful. This has been somewhat addressed in a recent patch, but it still definitely has more of a demand than any other place you can live in. I've asked a couple of people who are more knowledgeable about the technical side of Rimworld as to what's likely causing this, and the culprit appears to be the lighting. The Glowforest is full of new, unique bioluminescent plants. Boomshrooms, Psilocaps, willowgills and agarlux, which makes sense given the name, a Glowforest. The biome is normally dark because of the sulfur spouts barfing clouds into the atmosphere, which means all of those light sources are having to be drawn constantly across an entire map, with any wandering wildlife and colonists walking outside of your base then needing to check against varying levels of light that could be impacting their movement speed. All of this leads up to a fairly miserable place to live, as cranking the game to max speed is noticeably more sluggish than anywhere else, especially once your colony starts to get into the high numbers with more tasks that also need to be completed. Secondly, this place is grim because of those previously mentioned sulfur spouts. The first thing I thought when seeing them was, cool, I bet if I block these off I can return the lighting to normal. No. All they do is take up space on the map and potentially give you access to a natural thermal vent, if you want to make some kind of hotbox trap for raiders. Geothermals can't be placed on them, and sealing them off doesn't fix the tile. It's a bit of a missed opportunity, although I'm sure someone has already designed an absolutely insane kill box by linking all of the sulfur spouts together with one long corridor, and having raiders walk through it to try and reach the base. It can be a tricky biome to live in if you wanted to use any kind of normal starting tactic. The natural lighting here is going to significantly lower your crop options, as well as limiting your early game power choices. If you're rolling with ideology, you might think that picking something like Darkness or Tunnel Art would work quite well, and whilst they can help with removing the debuff for eating mushrooms, mountain spawns with a Glowforest are surprisingly uncommon. They rarely spawn with anything more than a small hill, so you're likely going to be living in a standard settlement. And not only that, the lighting in this biome sits between darkness and light, at around 50% ambient from most of the glowing plants. So you're not getting the bonuses for fighting in the dark, and all of the plants aren't putting out dark light, so no mood buff either. On top of all of that, the ground itself is similar to living in a bog or a rainforest, so you'll have large patches that are going to need bridges to support structures, or you'll have to research moisture pumps and wait entire quadrums whilst they get to work. There has to be something positive for me to say about this biome though, right? Well, it certainly comes with a lot of fertile soil, as in pretty much all of the soil on this map is going to be rich, or at the very least 100% fertility. You don't get any stony soil here. The downside to this of course is that light never gets above 50%, so you either need to build a greenhouse and use sun lamps to grow standard crops, or live entirely off of Nutrifungus, which makes next to no use of that fertility bonus. Glowforests do have a wider range of allowed generation than the Grasslands. You can expect a more seasonal cycle if you settle here long term, ranging anywhere from a 35-60 split all the way up to year round, with slightly less rainfall than the Grasslands but a much higher disease frequency. Glowforests end up equal to living in a swamp, basically. That's going to put this biome around the same difficulty as living in a tropical rainforest or a tropical swamp, purely because you aren't going to have any access to heal root, it won't grow naturally on your tile, and you will be slapped with a colony-wide flu or malaria wave a couple of times a year. You're going to need to get down a sun lamp ASAP to make sure people aren't dying to a preventable disease, which means you also need quite a good chunk of power generation right off the bat when you start living here too.
1.21 gigawatts! Great Scott!
The next biome is quite a jump in aesthetic, the Glacial Plains. This falls in between living on a tundra and an ice sheet map. It has access to some of the soil and plants that you would get from a tundra map, while still largely being covered in ice, meaning you need to make a conscious effort to plan out and utilise your floor space if you're intending to farm for food, with its growing periods typically falling into a 2060. Again, you're going to need to make use of a sun lamp and include a heater to get your greenhouse working here. The biggest point of interest to the Glacial Plains are the wide variety of large, dangerous animals that come in with it. It's going to make hunting both extremely lucrative and potentially lethal, so you don't always need to go the route of farming with this biome, you just need to come absolutely strapped. You're also going to find large chunks of solid ice that will frequently conceal a hidden ruin and the riches that still remain within them, as well as the odd trap or two. This ice seems to always generate with a removable roof, meaning that it's completely safe to mine it out on your map and open up the buildable space as well. The ice is also pretty fragile, so it shouldn't take too long to hack your way through all of it. There isn't really that much more to say about this biome. Besides it having a tendency to throw horrific weather your way, it's honestly not that unpredictable. You've got a low disease frequency and bitingly cold winters, but outside of that, a bit of sensible building and old reliable tactics from base game are going to see you through just fine. Some stone walls, some airlocked entrances and exits to keep the heat in your base, and all of the leather and meat that you could ever want right on your doorstep. Just make sure that you're not wandering too far from your base when the scimitar cats start to look peckish. Now we have the lava fields, yet another dramatic jump in visuals. These will rarely generate in large blobs on your world map, with it being more common that small, scattered lava fields appear and make use of biome transition mechanics to half and half your map. This biome is also far more likely to occur with large hills or mountains present, so make sure to bring a pickaxe if you want to settle here for the long term. Despite the toasty appearance of the lava field, it isn't entirely unreasonable to live here. You just need to be aware of what you're getting yourself into. Firstly, these can spawn all over the place, so the temperature range and growing periods will be entirely based off how far you move from the equator. Also probably going to play quite a large role in deciding if it's better to settle inside the safety of whatever mountain or hill is on the map, or if you try and build externally, as the thermal insulation that a solid mountain roof offers is going to make a huge difference to your power consumption when regulating the temperature, as well as keeping you safe from some of the more extreme weather the lava fields will throw at you. You're going to need to pay a little bit more attention than normal to what your group of idiots are doing at any given time on this map, as whilst deep lava is impassable and won't actually pose a risk to them, the occasional volcanic eruptions that spew shallow lava over your map will leave a pool that can be traversed at a very slow speed. If there's only ever one route that leads to their destination, and it happens to take them waist deep through a bright red 1000-degree swimming pool, they'll take a moment, breathe, and then try to make it.
I'm pretty sure I can struggle my way out. First, I'll just reach in and pull my legs out. Now I'll pull my arms out with my face.
This often quirky pathfinding works both ways though. Raiders might try to assault you whilst casually melting their lower bodies, and traders will sometimes walk their pack animals right over the danger zone, dropping all of their goodies for you. Just be aware that an entire caravan's worth of loot is no good to you when it's on fire and inaccessible. Outside of that, this biome is pretty varied in terms of the challenges that you'll face living here. You're probably going to find yourself somewhat starved of decent soil, based on what other biome the lava field might be bordering anyway, so you potentially need to traverse quite a long distance to grab any fertile soil patches, meaning your planters are always left quite exposed. Whilst the terrain affordance itself here is usually solid, meaning you can build basically everywhere, you need to consider the potential threat that volcanic debris is going to pose and keep your structures fireproof, as well as building in more points of access to and from your base than you typically would. On the plus side, these places are normally littered with steam geysers for your geothermal power, so you can build an incredibly demanding base with relative ease, making it great for a transhumanist colony or those looking to dig deep into filling out a xenogenetic library. Realistically, this could probably go below the Glacial Plains to begin with, as getting started in the lava fields is generally easier. However, the threats from a lava field are never really negated. Colonists can always be a dipshit and burn to death in a shallow lava pool because you looked away. Whereas on the Glacial Plain, once you've got a heater or two set up and some walls around your base established, the risk that comes with living there from the temperature and wildlife is pretty much gone, with the risk then being a solar flare killing whatever crops you're trying to grow, which is going to be an issue regardless of what biome you live in when you're making use of sun lamps, greenhouses or hydroponics. That just leaves the Scarlands then, and these are intentionally inhospitable, for many different reasons. Firstly, they're a pain in the arse to build on. There's going to be impassable craters that you need to fill all over the place, as well as the majority of the floor being covered with ancient megastructure that has just 5% fertility, making whatever small patches of soil you do have access to extremely valuable. But let's say that you didn't want to grow your food and decide to hunt instead. Well, the options are equally limited. A large percentage of the animals that spawn in the Scarlands have scaria, meaning they're far more likely to retaliate when hurt and will usually go instantly rotten upon death anyway, leaving no meat or leather to be harvested. That's if you're able to walk around outside to hunt anyway, as toxic fallout is common here, so good luck keeping those plants alive in the outdoors. This biome frequently sees you locked inside your base having to wait things out, and if you do venture outside and happen to cross any body of water, you get toxic buildup anyway, as it's full of microplastics, turds and used condoms, like Brighton Beach. Broadly speaking, the Scarlands are a place that you visit for a quest or a quick holdover. Whilst you can settle a tile like this and make it somewhat viable, it's a pretty miserable existence all around. Although with that being said, this place does become a paradise for wasters. They're able to contribute to the already toxic nature of the biome by adding in a bunch of their own pollution, and they're free to walk around as they please. When talking about how new biomes rank in terms of difficulty, there is the new landmark and features system in the world generation, which can change any biome into somewhere easier or harder to live.
It's raining again.
The landmarks have a toggle icon on the world map screen if you would like to find them immediately, and whilst features can generate on any tile, going to a landmark is a quick way to find the most interesting features or the largest groupings of features, with them ranging from more diverse shapes of map generation, like a fjord, a lake with an island, or a cave hollow, to a site that features a ruins, an abandoned storehouse, or an ancient garrison. If you zoom into the world map, you'll be able to tell what the icons relate to, as structures are shown in small grey building clusters, while natural landmarks are also represented fairly accurately. Most of these urban locations are great stops on a nomad run or ideal to visit when you get your hands on a shuttle, as they typically contain a few bits of high quality loot to gather whilst you restock your other supplies and prepare to move on again. Not only do you have this landmark system, which is going to generate a large addition to the map, there are also map features, which can occur on any tile. These vary dramatically, and there are more in game than I'm going to list here. A lot of them follow similar conventions, so you'll get the idea from me giving you a general framework. You have features that will make certain weather more common, like sunny, foggy or rainy. There are those that will change the amount of animals, plants or trees across the entire map, like oak groves for a large amount of oak trees, or decreased animal life for a tile with very little wandering meat and leather. And whilst there can be increased or decreased plant density in a general sense on a tile, you might also get less common plants growing as standard, such as wild cotton, cocoa, psychoid or smokeleaf. These wild plants will continue to regrow after harvesting too, so they aren't a one and done when you visit the map. You might find high density veins of a certain ore or other material, as well as increased density of geothermal vents. You may even find a hot spring. You could land on a tile that has increased pollution without the visible smog cloud on the world map. It could feature an ancient uplink that can be hacked to lead you to a hidden orbital quest, with even more unique features like ancient refineries, quarries, launch sites, garrisons, junkyards, smoke vents, stockpiles or warehouses. This goes a long way in making the world alive and interesting to explore, giving you a reason to pack a handful of colonists into a shuttle and fly them around your surrounding area, grabbing any riches you can find. Just remember that you can use the search function on the world map too. You don't need to manually scrape the entire planet to find an interesting site if you know roughly what you want. You could just search for hot and it'll bring up every landmark with a hot spring, especially useful if you have a venerated animal from Ideology 2, as searching for them might bring up an area that features a habitat. Just bear in mind that this search feature only shows landmarks with those tags. So if you search for Boomalopes, say, and it doesn't appear to yield any results, that doesn't mean there are 0 Boomalope habitats on your planet, only that the ones that do exist are located on a more standard tile of sorts. You can also hold down the Alt key whilst mousing over the world map to bring up a quick overview of any tiles too. Just be aware that this only works when you've already started the game. For some reason it won't let you do this while you're picking your starting tile, which is kinda when you actually want it.
What about you guys? We ain't found shit!
Up until now, there hasn't really been an expansion to encourage exploration in a meaningful way before. Sure, there's been quest sites to visit, but no reason to just wander the world map outside of going to those specific sites when the time calls for it. With Odyssey, you completely flip the script, and it has to remind you it's 10 PM. Do you know where your colonists are? Now you might actually feel like you're missing out by making a static base and only interacting with the others who arrive on your tile. There's a big wide world out there. Get out there and rob it blind. Alright, we've done the Xenotype, the meme, the biomes, the map changes. Let's talk about the flora and fauna. For the new plants that aren't purely cosmetic, you'll find Boomshrooms, Psilocaps, Snagroot Trees and the Archean Tree. There aren't any new plants appearing in your grow zone options, so you're only going to find these out in the world or by finding a rare seed. Boomshrooms will only survive in dark conditions, so you're going to come across these in the Glowforest. They're exceptionally volatile, but you don't need to sweat any botched harvests causing them to explode, thankfully. So if you send a colonist with a low skill in plants to try and gather from these, it isn't actually that dangerous. The risk with a Boomshroom comes from excessive amounts of missed shots clipping them or uncontrolled fires reaching them. These aren't going to warn you like an IED, grenade or chem fuel with any kind of sizzle before they decide to go bang. Boomshrooms just explode and deal huge burn damage in the surrounding area. Boomshrooms also take an almost ludicrous amount of time to reach maturity, with a growing time of 60 days and barely any fertility sensitivity to speak of. Remember that plants that grow in darkness will still need to take time to rest, so you can take that growing time and basically double it for a more accurate estimate. To the numbers nerds out there, I know that isn't close to the actual growth formula in the slightest, as you also need to take into account ideal temperature, ground fertility and fertility sensitivity, but it's the simplest way to do it in the vast majority of cases, and it's far easier for a new player to work with. At 100% growth, each of these shrooms is going to yield 8 chem fuel. Let's face it, you're not going to be making much use of these if you're living in a Glowforest. However, if you land on one with a Gravship, it's a quick and easy source of some extra fuel before you take off again. That growing time isn't a concern for you, and if you harvest them a little bit early and don't get the best yield, you're still going to be getting more than if you didn't do it.
Like, okay, how much nut do you guys blow through in a month?
I don't want to talk to you about...
Yeah, I figured you were, man. So you got to try to hang on to some of that nut, otherwise it's all gone.
Psilocaps are another plant that typically appears in the Glowforest, although you can find these appearing in cave networks or underground caverns, basically anywhere they can stay hidden from the sun and prosper. It's another plant that comes with a fairly long growing time, but it's nowhere near as excessive as a Boomshroom, with maturity taking 20 days, so again, roughly double it for a more realistic number. The expected yield from each of these plants is 5 when fully grown, with Psilocap consumption being totally safe, in terms of an addiction risk anyway. Outside of the health and mood effect that these provide when consumed, they have a very small chance to inspire a colonist or to cause them to have a catatonic breakdown, knocking them out of commission for multiple days. So just because something doesn't run the risk of an addiction doesn't make it a great option to absolutely rinse through with your entire colony either. Consuming the Psilocaps isn't the only way to get their hallucinogenic effect, however. Simply standing near the plants or walking by a large amount of them is going to passively increase the hallucination percentage on the health tab, although this passive gain doesn't run that risk of a catatonic breakdown or give you an opportunity to gain an inspiration. The hallucination effect itself has 3 stages. Minor, which goes from 1% to 24%, lowers consciousness to 90% with the upside of a +5 mood buff. Moderate occurs between 25 and 84%, lowering consciousness down to 70% and also slowing global work speed by 20% too. This grants a mood bonus of 14. The final severity, Extreme, sets consciousness to a max of 35%. It lowers global work speed by 50% and it improves mood by a massive 24. This high, fortunately, drops off pretty quickly, with even the most severe exposure lasting just 12 hours. Eating a Psilocap, not counting for any tolerances, grants a huge 70% chemical consumption recreation and pushes the hallucination severity up to 60%, meaning you're looking at about 7 or 8 hours of wibbly shapes and vibrant colours for every dose. To put the recreation gain into context, beer is 17%, Psychite tea is 40%, ambrosia is 50% and flake is 70%. So whilst this isn't quite up there with something like yayo or smoke leaf, a Psilocap is basically free mood, with a small chance of sleepy time. Realistically, you don't even need to harvest them. You can build a small outdoor rec area around them and passively gain the buff before going to bed for blissful dreams.
If you should die before you wake.
Can't sleep. Clown will eat me. Can't sleep. Clown will eat me.
Snagroot trees are a really quick one to cover. They're some of the only plant life that's going to be able to survive in the Scarlands, with a growing time of 52 days and an expected harvest yield of 8. For context, a pine tree takes 20 days and yields 27 wood, so Snagroots are taking more than twice as long for a third of the yield. The Scarlands really doesn't want you to live there. On the opposite side of that entirely is the Archean Tree. You'll find this as a seed, similar to the Garranlan, Pollux or Harbinger tree, although both the Archean Tree and Harbinger can naturally sprout as well. In the 40-hour run that I beat the DLC with, I found 1 seed in that entire time. The Archean Tree has a 13x13 area around itself, minus the 6 tiles in each corner. Within that radius, it's going to convert any natural tile into fertile soil, be it stone, sand, or standard soil. The exception here is a tile that would normally need to be hit by a moisture pump, like mud, marsh, or shallow water. But if you use a moisture pump to turn it into soil first, the Archean Tree can then take over afterwards and upgrade it to fertile. It's a really quick process to do as well. This tree isn't doing a single tile a day, it does 2 tiles every hour, meaning the 146 tiles that it can impact should only take around 3 days to fully saturate. However, the Archean Tree can't be moved after it's finished doing this. You can't just uproot it and have it start working on a new patch. If you're happy with what it's accomplished, you can cut it down and replace it with a sun lamp to make a very centralised, temperature-controlled indoor grow zone that doesn't consume as much power as using a hydroponics setup. However, the fertile soil isn't the only thing that this tree is doing. Archean trees also kick out oxygen and can survive in the vacuum of space without any issue. You're even able to build a roof over the top of them, making them perfect to establish an orbital grow room and keep your colonists alive by providing oxygen throughout the station. Just be aware that these will kick out fertile soil considerably faster than they will fill a room with a breathable atmosphere. If people are opening and closing doors all over the place to rooms that aren't vacuum sealed, this tree is going to struggle to keep the air saturated with a meaningful amount of O2. So expect your colonists to get pretty lightheaded. That's the plants covered, but we also get 2 new building materials to play with in Odyssey 2. So let's quickly cover those before we jump into talking about animals. Vacstone is a unique material from asteroids, and it's basically essential if you're intending to do long distance or orbital travel with a grav ship. This unfortunately means you need to go into orbit with a grav ship equivalent of a lemon, or make use of a shuttle or transport pod to reach it initially. Once you've upgraded your ship with the structures that use Vacstone, it's going to make any future trips far easier. Being quite difficult to get your hands on, it's understandably one of the better building materials that you can make use of in-game. It has a higher hit point modifier than granite, as well as a small percentage increase to the beauty of anything constructed out of it, whilst not quite reaching the highs of something like marble. It'll beat out everything else and stay strong while doing it though. Vacstone blocks are also slightly lighter than other stone material, making it easier to ferry a large amount of it around on a shuttle or in transport pods. Whilst you can use it for a weapon like a club, it's not really the best use case for it. The other new material is Obsidian. This stuff is pretty hard to come by, with deposits rarely appearing in the lava fields biome. It's definitely something that's best to use the search function to find if you want to make a trip to go and grab some. Obsidian rock is incredibly hardy, with 1200 health per chunk, typically resulting in a yield of about 40 or so in usable material. The mined obsidian is incredibly brittle. It's basically wasted on building walls or defensive structures, with halved max HP and awful armor stats all round. Its beauty, on the other hand, is impeccable, only being beaten by jade and gold. And whilst you could use obsidian to make art and have some very impressive rooms, its other use is in melee weaponry, specifically sharp weapons. Obsidian beats plasteel. Whilst plasteel will swing more frequently thanks to being extremely lightweight, obsidian hits harder and cuts deeper, increasing the likelihood of getting into combat and ending a foe with one good swing, rather than needing to machine gun puncture wounds into someone. For another stat comparison, and I get that it's rare that you would find a normal quality mono sword, side by side an obsidian longsword is doing more DPS than a mono sword of equal quality. Of course, the mono sword gets through a much greater percentage of armour, but it's not something you can reliably make for yourself. With a high skilled crafter that's usually able to hit excellent, maybe even the odd masterwork or two, it won't take very long to basically gear your melee fighters for the rest of the game. The only thing that's going to beat these are persona weapons or an extremely rare horn. Alright, let's talk animals, and whilst there's quite a lot to get through here, animals are still largely animals. Once you know what they butcher into and what their trainability stats are, they're pretty much all the same thing with a different skin. Nothing is going to be jumping over your walls or burrowing underneath them to avoid your kill box. A single closed door is still the best defense you can build against a 100-strong manhunter pack.
You think hiding in this room is gonna keep you safe?
Ghosts can't go through doors, stupid. They're not fire.
Pierce.
Anyway, we've got 43 new animals to get through, so let's try and break them down into some kind of sensible grouping. First off, there's the new flying animals, which can enter and exit the map from any point rather than just the border. That still does not allow them to cross impassable terrain though. It just means if you try and hunt them and you miss your shots, there's a pretty high chance that they'll flick you the Vs and leave. You'll find the bluebird, macaw, quail, sparrow, swan, crow, flamingo, heron and vulture all fall into this category. The smaller birds, like sparrows and bluebirds, only yield a tiny amount of meat and no leather, with larger things like herons, swans and vultures providing a small amount of bird skin. You're likely to notice that animals that have been killed by another predator will work in attracting the carrion feasting birds, so sometimes you can get more meat in the long run by leaving a corpse out to bait a bunch of vultures in. Whilst it's incapable of flight, the peacock is another animal that's included, with it behaving like an ostrich, emu or cassowary. Well, it's less of a dick at least, as you can shoot at it without it trying to rip your face off. Then you've got the new animals that tend to lean towards a more amphibious environment, so you're typically going to find these around coastal areas, lakes or rivers. This includes the hippo, alligator, bullfrog, colossus toad, hermit crab, stone crab, otter, mink, penguin, sea lion, sea turtle, seal and walrus. A few of these do come in with new leathers too. Hippos for instance have hippo leather, which is extremely similar to elephant leather in its properties. The walrus, sea lion and seal all give seal skin, which leans more towards good temperature tolerances rather than high armor values, making it especially useful for things like parkas in icy biomes, as it packs similar cold insulation to most high-grade wool, but it's still sturdier thanks to its leathery nature. The other unique material from this is mink fur, which packs more beauty than guinea pig fur but not quite as much as chinchilla fur. As you would expect, this makes it great for things like seating, or it can be used as a high-value trade good, with minks initially being somewhat difficult to handle, but making up for it with fast gestation and growing times. Next, we're going to cover the more general livestock or passive animals that you're likely to find. This includes the lava snail, moose, muskox, panda, porcupine, prairie dog, monitor lizard, armadillo and megavole. Some of these can be quite useful to have around as passive workers. The megavole can be trained to dig for you, allowing you to slowly mine out areas with animals whilst your colonists get to focus on other work. The armadillo is well worth ranching if you're able to get your hands on a breeding pair, as armadillo leather is on par with heavy fur in terms of its defensive properties, but you need to butcher a lot more armadillo to get a similar amount of material when compared to a single megasloth. Still, they're easy enough to maintain and they have a very passive nature, so failed taming attempts aren't going to be a concern. Muskox will provide you with a new type of wool that slightly edges out muffalo in its cold protection, with a muskox also providing slightly more meat when fully grown and butchering into generic plain leather rather than blue fur. Porcupines can be utilised to torture prisoners, or to keep an entity from anomaly permanently pacified, as the spines that they use to attack need surgical operation to remove. If you instead leave them present in a target, it inflicts constant pain, and that can be used to keep them in a down state. It's miserable, but it's effective.
Just give me a minute.
The lava snail only butchers into meat, it offers no leather, but it has one of the highest meat per day values whilst it's growing, with litter sizes between 1 and 3, as well as only needing a standard amount of grass to maintain. If you're able to smuggle a couple of these out of the lava fields, they're pretty handy to have around. The panda is also a pretty damn easy source of bear skin, as it has no self-preservation or survival instinct. You just need to live with yourself after shooting it in the face. That leaves the more aggressive animals that come in with Odyssey. The mastodon, boghound, badger, gorilla, great wolf, scimitar cat, tiger and wolverine. Most of these are going to provide fairly solid leather, normally something I'd aim for when crafting my first few sets of gear, but there are going to be better options available, with panthera fur and wolf skin being quickly overtaken. You're likely to be earning this somewhat passively in a biome that features these aggressive animals though, as they either go for your colonists and require putting down, or they attack something trivial like a squirrel and somehow take a serious cut to the neck and eventually die from blood loss, making them free for the taking. The mastodons are one of the new big threats, as it were. Whilst scimitar cats and great wolves will retaliate or actively hunt your colonists, they don't normally work in a pack. If you want to take down a mastodon, you're usually fighting the entire group. It's very similar to hunting elephants or rhino. If you're able to tame them, mastodons provide the second best wool in the game, only beaten by the megasloth, and when butchered they give mastodon leather, which is very similar to elephant in terms of its protection, so you get a double dip on solid materials, as well as harvesting their tusks, which can be used as a melee weapon or sold to traders for a pretty tidy profit. Not only that, tamed mastodons have the war trumpet ability, which will disorient any hostiles in a fairly large area, making them especially effective in combat as a support fighter. They aren't the only animal in Odyssey that retaliates as a pack though. That's what makes the boghounds so dangerous. If you've got a solid group of ranged combatants, they're not that bad, but if you're out with only a few colonists and a stray shot strikes one of these, it's pretty much an expectation that someone is going to be clawed half to death in order to give your other colonists the time and space that they need to effectively pull the trigger. For more brutal combatants in the DLC that don't make use of group tactics, you'll find that things like the scimitar cat, tiger and great wolf can be tamed and trained to make use of the attack target ability, which lets you designate who you would like them to go for rather than relying on the often wonky combat AI. This gives you far better options, like using them to chase down runners, tying up individual ranged enemies with dangerous weapons in melee combat, or having them intercept the enemies that are chasing after your gunners to give them a bit more breathing room. If you're going to go to the effort of taming dangerous animals for combat, as far as I'm concerned, they're near worthless without this ability. It makes such a massive difference to both the survivability and effectiveness of them in combat. It's pretty much the baseline expectation that they can either do this or have enough HP to tank a boatload of hits. Which brings us to the Alpha Thrumbo. You're only ever going to find this at the quest site, with it being flanked and supported by additional standard Thrumbo. The Alpha Thrumbo itself comes in with a roar ability that causes anyone within the AoE to flee. Provided you engage with it from a decent range though, it usually spaffs this ability up the wall immediately, impacting nobody and allowing you to charge in. If you wanted to get into melee with it anyway, I wouldn't recommend it. The Alpha Thrumbo stats are insane, and it takes a biblical amount of punishment before going down, so you'll probably want to try and snipe its escort off one by one as they wander too far from the group. The last thing you need is the group revenge chance to proc, leading to you dealing with an entire herd at the same time. The Alpha itself drops the new best leather in the game, Thrumbo Mane, which is just a few % better than Thrumbo Fur on every stat, while also offering a flat +5 to beauty, as well as the 800% increase. The Alpha will also drop its horn, which packs a little bit more penetration, but a hell of a lot more DPS than a normal Thrumbo horn, almost hitting 20, which is nearly twice that of the standard. Just remember, if you've gone to the effort of actually hunting and butchering this beast, for the love of God do something with its leather. It's nearly 400 silver worth of material that it butchers into. It's doing absolutely nothing for you if it's sitting on a shelf because you aren't sure how it'd best be used. Button down shirts and pants are always useful.
He's gonna make a tuxedo out of our puppies. Na 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 na.
That just leaves the insects that are included with Odyssey, the Hive Queen, Larva and Locust. We'll cover the small buggos first. Locusts are a flying bug that seems to have been included purely to try and tie up your ranged combatants in melee so that larger, more dangerous insectoids can creep closer. Whilst their move speed may not initially seem that dangerous at just 3, they will beat out your average colonist that's moving at 4.6, thanks to how speedy they become when airborne. Their damage is nothing too special, they hit for just a single point more than a Mega Scarab, but they're capable of taking more damage before succumbing to their wounds, with a shell that's almost twice as healthy as their tiny brothers. Provided you're making good use of target priority and hit and run tactics, it is possible to bait out any locusts in a swarm of insects and deal with them first. Then grab some distance to let the AI reset so that the more dangerous bugs return to the hive. This means when you do go to engage with the mega spiders and spellipedes that need more damage to kill, you won't be getting dive bombed by these gits. The larvae are the weakest of all insects, doing less damage and being more fragile than a mega scarab. The danger with a larva lies in their sludge spew ability, that reaches up to 7 tiles away and hits in a 3x3 box for acid burns, as well as it leaving insect sludge on the floor. This sludge slows anything other than insects that try and traverse it, making retreats more difficult when you're running away over a human glue trap. The egg sacs that you find in the insect hives will contain larvae, and whilst you can safely walk around them, if they take even a glancing amount of damage, they burst open and drop a battle-ready larva, which could lead to a sudden acidic sludge bath for a good amount of your colonists. The Hive Queen is the new big nasty, doing absolutely lethal strikes if you're brave or foolish enough to engage her in a melee range. With body parts that are almost 4 times as tanky as a mega spider, she's going to take a lot of hits to bring down, and in that time the Queen will also make use of her egg spew ability. This has a 15 tile max range and it hits in a thick, focused arc, similar to how something like an incinerator does a wide sweep, with splash damage landing in front and behind of the main line. This doesn't stretch quite as wide, but it does go a lot deeper. At the centre of the area it targets, an egg sac is going to be created, with all of the surrounding area splashed with that same sludge that a larva uses, on a much wider scale. This means more sticky flooring, and potentially, depending on how the Queen aimed her shot, she might burst existing egg sacs with the acid, so you might be dealing with more enemies on top of you that are throwing further acid bath attacks. If you're not careful, this can lead to rather rapid spiralling, so it's best to bully the egg sacs as and when you see them so that they're just out of the way. As a fairly important note, this hive flooring will only take hold on tiles that don't already have a floor present, so natural stone, dirt and sand, they're all fair game. But as long as you've put a little bit of concrete down in your kill box, you're not at risk of this slow effect. If the hive flooring did happen to land somewhere that you would normally want to traverse, you can get rid of it using the remove floor order, or by lobbing a Molotov its way, as it's pretty flammable. Whilst the Queen doesn't come with any unique drops, no horn, jelly or shell, she does provide a huge amount of insect meat when butchered, and the hive that she'll have been guarding normally comes with a reward that you are actually after. Before we move on to another section, let's quickly mention the advanced trainability for animals that comes in with Odyssey. We've already got an idea about this because of the Mastodon's war cry, the Thrumbo's roar, Larva's sludge spit, Queen's egg spew, aggressive animals having the targeted attack, and things like the Megavole being able to dig. There are a few others though, such as friendly animals that you would normally buy from traders, like dogs and cats. They have an improved nuzzle ability that provides a larger mood boost on a shorter cooldown. Certain animals are also able to forage, like pigs digging through the mud to find extra scraps. This forage ability isn't exactly mind-blowing though. In practice, it seems to have multiple days between occurrences and it only finds a trivial amount of food when it does proc. The last part around trainability is the Sentience Catalyst. These can be used once per animal, with the installed catalyst increasing consciousness by 10% and reducing wildness by 25%. Which is going to make them easier to handle and train. This catalyst will also bump up the trainability level of an animal, so none becomes intermediate, intermediate becomes advanced. If the animal is already advanced in its trainability, it's not going to unlock some new potential, unfortunately. It'll just be easier to maintain its already established training. These Sentience Catalysts don't appear to be that hard to come by either. They were definitely one of the more common new items that I've frequently found in my loot pool, and you're also able to use these on wild animals before you've completed the initial taming, with seemingly no risk of revenge for injecting them. It might make it just a little bit safer to use these first on something like a great wolf if you were trying to tame it by wandering up and offering it food, rather than having to down it, rescue it, and then making attempts in a more controlled environment.
And that talking coyote was really just a talking dog.
Hi, Homer. Find your soulmate.
Hey, wait a minute. There's no such thing as a talking dog. Damn straight.
On from animals, it's fishing. This is a new tech that only needs 600 points to unlock at the Neolithic stage. Researching this is going to grant you access to a fishing zone. These can be placed over any body of water that has a known fish population. How will you know if fish are present? I pretend to hear you asking for a narrative effect. Simple, mouse over a pond, river, lake or ocean and it will display what type of fish can be caught, as well as the current and maximum population that the area can support as well. So a small pond may only hold 20 or so salmon, but a larger lake could hold up to 80, with a flowing river or the ocean offering literally hundreds of fish to catch. If you've used the fishing mod prior to playing Odyssey, this is a little bit different, as the zone also has its own bill settings, like you would find on a crafting bench, with options to perform fishing a certain number of times until X amount of fish has been caught, or forever. You won't be able to completely empty a water source of its fish population however, with the lowest it's ever allowed to go being 10 fish remaining, and the less fish remaining in a body of water, the longer it takes for their numbers to recover. Sustainability is the name of the game here. You need to find the right balance between keeping your colony fed in the moment and not starving your future self. Of course, fishing's especially handy if you have a bounty of crops coming in a couple of days' time, but you're starving right now. A little bit of overfishing won't matter when you're about to swap your diet over to rice for the next 3 months anyway. They're going to have plenty of time to recover. I've seen a few people unhappy about how the fishing work type is tied into hunting, and I do get it. I use work tab so I was splitting out the priority or disabling it on certain colonists to make sure that the people I wanted to go and hunt animals weren't also spending their entire day fishing. Likewise, the people that I wanted fishing weren't going out with a crappy gun and chasing a deer around the map for 7 hours. If you're not using work tab, it's something you need to get a little bit micromanagement heavy with, more so than I would like when hunting and fishing are very different jobs.
Ready?
Yeah. Another important part to mention with fishing is the nutritional values of fish. They actually matter, unlike with meat and veggies. The colonist's animal skill is going to determine both how long it takes them to complete a fishing action, as well as how many fish they will catch in a single cycle. However, the size of fish is also going to play into how many a colonist is able to catch, with small, medium and large varieties. Small fish include guppies and toxfish. These provide just 0.05 nutrition, which is the same as all other food in Rimworld. You'll be fishing them up by the dozen and throwing in handfuls of them to make even a single simple meal. Medium fish include the bass, bluefish, cod, piranha, salmon and tilapia. These give 0.25 nutrition each, with medium fish being the more common varieties that you're going to find in rivers and lakes. Large fish are catfish, dogfish, flounder, frostfish, marlin and tuna, offering 0.5 nutrition per unit. That is a single simple meal from just one fish. These are great if you need a space-saving choice for your freezers, as rather than needing stacks on stacks of meat and veggies, just a few fish will translate over into an entire stack of meals. Just be aware that if you put large fish into a nutrient paste dispenser, it's actually wasteful, as they only need to process 0.3 nutrition per meal, so you're putting a lot of time and effort into fishing to get the same result that could be achieved by blending up a bunch of guppies. These large fish are typically found in ocean waters, making the best place to settle if you want to run a fishing village right along the coastline. Whilst living near a large lake or a river can still work, keeping an entire colony fed with just fish is going to need a source that occupies about half of your map. The final thing to mention with fishing is the occasional bit of loot, or junk, that you might happen to catch. I caught a couple of odd bits during my own playthrough, a woolen top hat and an awful quality revolver to be specific, but I've seen people posting all kinds of things online, including excellent quality prestige cataphract armor and corpses, so the potential range of what you can find when fishing is seemingly the entire database of items, minus structures. Feel free to correct me on that though if you happen to fish up a minified bed or sculpture. In terms of finding awesome loot, let's talk about the new weapons, starting with the unique variants included in Odyssey. There are 13 potential weapons that can have unique modifiers: the Great Bow, Revolver, Bolt Action Rifle, Heavy SMG, Chain Shotgun, Assault Rifle, Hellcat Rifle, Sniper Rifle, LMG, Minigun, Charge Rifle, Charge Lance and Beam Repeater. Weapons like this aren't just randomly generating in a raider's hands either. These are reserved for quest rewards, hidden in loot crates, given as a gift, found as a fishing treasure. They're always wielded by a named quest target at an ancient mercenary site, and there will always be one present at an orbital item stash too. so you don't need to go sifting through a pile of dead bodies at the end of every combat to try and scrounge these up. Due to the nature of their acquisition, it's rare that you're going to find a unique weapon below excellent quality, so its stats are already going to be pretty standout before further modifiers are applied. The range of possible weapon traits is of course going to be determined by the type of weapon it is. You're not going to put an underbarrel launcher on a great bow. Equally, you're not going to fire broadhead arrows from an assault rifle. I'm going by the wiki for this one, as testing it myself and recording it all down on a spreadsheet was a nightmare. At time of recording, there are 42 potential traits listed. It's worth knowing that not every trait is going to be positive. Some have both upsides and downsides, some are just negative. To live up to the name of my series, let's do a rundown, shall we? Quick reload, aim assist, custom grip, stabilizer brace, pulse charger, tox rounds, piercing rounds, incendiary rounds, EMP rounds, hollow point rounds, high power rounds, tox pellets, incendiary pellets, birdshot pellets, piercing arrows, paralytic arrows, broadhead arrows, lightweight arrows, reinforced limbs, extended barrel, improved sights, shoddy sights, precision scope, rangefinder scope, shortened barrel, rapid fire, extended magazine, charge capacity, EMP pulsar, frequency amplifier, oversized rounds, ornamental, ugly, lightweight, cumbersome, gold inlay, jade inlay, grenade launcher, EMP launcher, smoke launcher, incendiary launcher, and bioferrite burner. Now, there's obviously a boatload of words to throw at you without any meaningful context, but you can guess that there's a fair amount of crossover in what certain effects do, such as the launcher options working in the same way with a different payload, or the types of ammunition depending on what weapon they've occurred on, such as rounds being applied to firearms, pellets being applied to shotguns, and arrows being applied to bows. You'll be getting between 1 and 3 of these traits on a unique weapon, so fingers crossed the overlap works in your favour and it doesn't end up actually making the weapon worse. For example, on a bow you could get the perfect combo of reinforced limbs that increases range by 15%, lightweight that lowers aiming time by 20%, and broadhead arrows that buffs damage by 30%. It turns the great bow into a monster that removes entire limbs in a single shot, whilst being able to outrange an assault rifle. Alternatively, you could have got piercing arrows that improves armor penetration by 30% on a weapon that isn't really known for high penetration values, cumbersome that increases aiming time by 20%, and ugly that lowers beauty by 4. Of course, negative traits do have the upside that they're lowering the weapon's market value, so a unique weapon isn't as expensive to keep around or use, but you probably don't give much of a crap about it having a cheap market value when it's performing worse than a regular great bow of equal quality. A few traits to look out for are rapid fire, that doubles the fire rate of a weapon, especially powerful on something like a minigun, LMG, or the beam repeater. Extended magazine, that increases the burst count by 50%. Again, extremely useful on those previously mentioned guns, but equally deadly on a chain shotgun too. The pulse charger trait can only appear on the revolver, but it turns it into a friggin' monster. It lowers its accuracy across the board, but it buffs damage by 60% and increases armor penetration too. Given that the Revi comes in with such a low aiming time, the accuracy penalty can be fairly easily offset if you put it on a colonist with careful shooter. EMP rounds are always valuable on whatever weapon it happens to land on. It allows you to instantly break shield belts, destroy the domes from shield packs, or disrupt incoming mechanoid waves, all without any kind of penalty to the gun's base damage. You want to make sure that you keep any weapons that roll EMP safe and grab them off the ground instantly if they're dropped mid-combat. You don't want them taking any damage from explosions or fire. Paralytic arrows will turn the great bow into a more damaging nerve spiker, with higher accuracy at short, medium and long ranges, fantastic for big game hunting. Oversized rounds is something that can appear on any weapon that would normally have low stopping power, like the minigun. This adds an additional 2 stopping power to every single bullet. It makes one salvo from the weapon capable of causing all incoming humanoids take a knee and have to catch their breath, even from just glancing blows. For weapons that come in with launchers, their limited charges can be refueled with either steel for explosive ordnance, chem fuel for incendiary, or bioferrite for the anomaly specific burner. Now, unique weapons aren't the only thing you're getting. There's also a new bit of tech to unlock all the way after pulse charge munitions, so now you have an even higher tier, beam weapons, which also requires advanced fabrication. This research unlocks production of the beam grazer and beam repeater. The beam grazer was actually introduced with biotech. It's what the Tesseron mechanoids use. With Odyssey, you're able to build them for your own purposes. Rather unexpectedly, this weapon doesn't benefit from a quality modifier. It's always going to have the same stats regardless of how skilled your crafter is, for better or worse I guess, as it won't be coming out at an awful or poor quality. The Grazer itself is a fairly difficult weapon to make good use of, with it filling a similar niche to something like the Incinerator, only with a much greater range but far less splash damage. So you'll typically only use 1 or 2 of these across your entire colony just for crowd control, with the downside being it's going to make targets move unpredictably due to them burning and running around in a state of panic, likely ungrouping enemies and often causing your firing line to split their focus across multiple targets. Its attack is capable of punching through a surprising amount of armour, but it will be stopped by shields. However, that's only the attack damage that gets blocked by the shield. Its incendiary effect can still trigger across the line that the weapon has drawn, setting targets alight and burning them through their shield. The beam repeater is what happens when you let your minigun spend a drunken night in a hotel with a charge rifle. Despite their ultratech level, they're not absurdly expensive to make, costing just 40 plasteel, 30 steel and 3 advanced components. The repeaters, unlike the grazers, do take quality modifiers into consideration, so you only want your best crafters on these, with each one taking about 1,000 work to complete. For that time and material investment, you're getting 5 damage at a range of 22, on a burst of 30. Not only that, shots from this beam repeater completely ignore shields and pack 50% armor penetration. That's more than a charge lance, and those things absolutely rip through gear. The nice part about the damage profile being small hits in large volume means that enemies are more likely to fall down from a painful wound with their limbs still intact, compared to using, say, a sniper rifle, which often leads to a missing arm, leg or organ. Of course, the tricky part about using a beam repeater is that normally, range is king in Rimworld. It's far safer to keep a target at a distance that they cannot retaliate or engage with you, rather than relying on funneling them perfectly into a kill box that never fails or breaks. The lengthy aiming time of 4 seconds that this weapon needs also means raiders are extremely likely to get off a shot of their own, as you need to be within 22 tiles of range for the repeaters to work. That means heavy SMGs, assault rifles, bolt actions, even auto pistols and revolvers are able to take a pop at your repeater users, so you're unlikely to want to use these whilst roaming, especially as they come with a move speed penalty of 0.25. But if you know the enemy that you're going up against relies on melee attacks like bugs or Neanderthal groups, these can have a place when used in moderation. You definitely don't want them on everybody, but 2 or 3 colonists alternating their saturation fire into the entrance of your kill box is going to do wonders in staggering whatever is at the tip of the spear. There aren't a great amount of additional weapons included with Odyssey outside of these new unique variants and the beam weapons, but you will be able to make use of your own hunter drones that you're more frequently going to encounter as a trap in a quest location or an abandoned structure on the map. The tech for these hunter drones requires microelectronics, making them a more advanced defensive option, but less tech heavy than building something like an auto cannon. If you build the hunter drone as a trap, it costs 40 steel and 40 chem fuel. You won't be able to see the area of effect unfortunately, but through testing they appear to have a circular zone of control approximately 40 by 40 tiles in size, with line of sight being incredibly important to the hunter drone. As soon as they're able to see an enemy that comes within range, so think along the lines of what a firearm would need to take a shot, they will activate and start moving towards the target at a speed of 3.4. That means you can usually outrun a hunter drone trap when you encounter them, with their method of attack instead relying on your colonists getting caught up, waiting for a door to open, or being slowed because they're wearing a vac suit. If the hunter does manage to make it into melee with their target, or is hit with enough damage, it will explode. This also means that taking down a hunter drone by using someone as bait and having other colonists fire on it can be dangerous if the killing blow happens to land when it's just within range of the runner. The explosions are a pretty standard affair, 5x5 in size, dealing roughly the same damage as a frag grenade, so expect to see multiple shred wounds across the target with a chance to instantly kill them thanks to removing the head or an important organ. If, for some reason, a hunter drone was triggered but didn't get to explode, its internal battery will only last for 5 hours. When that depletes, the drone flops over, almost comically, and stops working. The hard part of using hunter drones as a trap meaningfully is, well, each one is 40 steel and 40 chem fuel that you just spaffed up the wall, with no guarantee that they're even going to make it to their target. They might not even hit the target that you want. They might not actually push their damage through the target's armour. Given that it's just 20 steel and 80 chem fuel to make an infinite use belt of frag grenades, this really doesn't stack up very well. For something that stacks up even worse, you could have made it as the Hunter Pack, with that costing 60 steel, 40 chem fuel and 2 components. But with it being a utility item, you must be able to rearm it with steel or chem fuel, right? Right? Wrong. This just lets you more accurately deliver the hunter drone into combat, with its max range being 21. Without wanting to dunk on this thing any further, but finding it very hard not to, compare it to what you would normally use for a single-use, ranged, crowd control explosive. The triple rocket launcher. Now, you can't build these for yourself, of course. You're going to have to purchase them from an orbital trader, grab them from a radar, or find them as loot, which isn't normally going to be a problem by the time you've got to microelectronics research anyway. You're going to have a comms console for orbitals, and weapons that can outrange rocket-wielding raiders are really easy to make. A rocket launcher packs 15 more range than a hunter drone. It hits with a burst 3 rather than a single explosion, and it has a 7x7 area of damage. If you are going to go the route of employing an explosive defense tactic, these are better in every aspect. The hunter packs are far too expensive for what they do, and whilst they may distract an enemy for a moment or two, or help in destroying their cover, it's easier and more cost effective to just back off and bait them out instead, or throw 3 rockets their way so that they're definitely dead. The other traps that come in with Odyssey won't be something that you can make use of yourself. You're going to encounter these fairly frequently if you're delving into complexes or exploring quest sites. The Wasp Drone comes in a pack of 3. They're extremely fast, extremely fragile, and extremely annoying. They exist to try and punish you for using a lone explorer, as triggering a group of wasps will normally see that colonist stun locked into next week, thanks to every attack that lands from the drone inflicting a 1.5 second stun. The damage that wasps do basically doesn't matter, as it's usually only around 5 or 6 per hit, but if they catch you whilst you're trying to run from a hunter drone, you're going to have a real bad time. Even worse is that if they catch a single target without any assistance nearby, they're going to needle them into submission by eventually downing them with an overwhelming amount of sharp wounds, leaving them to bleed out very slowly. The Sentry Drone is both annoyingly tanky and surprisingly fragile all at the same time. They roam the corridors of abandoned complexes looking for intruders, peppering them with surprisingly accurate shots from the scattergun that packs a high amount of stopping power. Again, this is there to let hunters or wasps catch up to the target and lock them down more easily. The Sentry doesn't have particularly high armor values, so shots or melee hits that do land against it do a good chunk of damage. But the limbs are just strong enough to be annoying, and it doesn't have an easy one-shot kill option like most mechanoids do with their reactor. This thing's core has 65 health, making it stronger than the chassis. Sentry drones end up tying you up for longer than you would like, which typically leads to more sentry drones turning up when they hear a fight kicking off. The harder part is often going to be the layout of the complexes that you have to fight these drones in too, with it favouring their short-range weaponry and close-quarters accuracy. Ideally, you want a mace, warhammer, or better yet, a Zeus hammer to hold the line against these shits.
There's only one path to peace. The Avengers' extinction.
All that's left for the ancient traps and defences is the turret. These things do better and worse than your standard mini turret, so it's a little bit of pick your poison, as it were. Mini turrets hit harder, but they fire a lower burst at a shorter range, then they have a faster cooldown. Ancient turrets, on the other hand, have range out the wazoo, but they only hit for 8, with the caveat that they'll shoot a burst of 3 on a longer cooldown. This means that an ancient turret doesn't have the dreaded one-shot potential. They aren't going to sneak a shot through the smallest crack in your cataphract armour and somehow brain the wearer. But they can still give you a pretty horrific scar that's going to leave the colonist impacted by it a vegetable. At least the mini turrets had the decency to finish the job. Just like with any other turret in the game, these do have a chance to explode upon reaching critical damage, so it's a risk to get in and slap them with melee weapons. But you're going to need sniper rifles if you want to outrange them, with it typically taking a solid hour or two of cycling shots to blow them up, thanks to how ancient turrets will often be placed pretty safely behind barricades or sandbags. Okay, let's wrap up some odds and ends in the tech tree before we progress any further, starting on heavy bridges. This is a super early tech that only needs 800 research to unlock, and gives you access to the heavy bridge itself. Now, these bridges are pretty damn expensive, with a standard bridge costing 12 wood and a heavy version needing 14 steel. The obvious major upside is it's no longer flammable, and it's capable of supporting both medium and heavy structures, so steel or stone walls as well as workstations, larger turrets or power generators. These bridges do still follow the same rules as when you're placing a standard bridge though. If the terrain is impassable, like deep water, you cannot build over it. These are looking for things like moving water, shallow water, marshes or mud. Unfortunately, you won't be able to build them over areas like soft sand or dry lake beds to act as a foundation and improve terrain affordance, so arid areas are still tricky to build in. At least swampy biomes are nicer now. With complex furniture, you now have both the adult and kid outfit stands, costing just 35 of your building material of choice for an adult version and 30 for the kids. These can be dressed and equipped exactly the same as you would a colonist when setting up a policy, with the condition modifiers, quality settings and all of the associated checkboxes for gear. You're more likely to make these a specific allowance rather than a general yes across the entire section, such as setting the stand to only accept wearing a marine helmet rather than any headgear. Once gear has been placed on the outfit stand, you can use the equip outfit gizmo with any colonist to quickly swap over the entire kit that was stored within it in one simple click. This is perfect for heavy armour that you wouldn't want to wear day in day out, fancy clothing that's going to improve trade prices and social impact for when a trader shows up, Vacsuits if you want to go out on a spacewalk, or as a place to hold a spare set of slave gear for any prisoners that you might acquire. And whilst you can't select someone that you don't control to equip an outfit from these, you can still right click and force others to wear something that's stored on it, making it easy to keep gear within arm's reach and save you needing to search for it in a storeroom. The option to allow removal of items from the stand being checked means that colonists will potentially equip a part of gear stored on the stand if they deem it better than what they are already wearing. So if you want the gear stored only to be used in case of emergency, or if you don't want people wearing Vacsuit helmets all the time and having them get dinked up, make sure to leave this unchecked so that people aren't playing dress up constantly. Also, if you're a dirty casual like me that uses gear mending mods, you will need that setting ticked in order to fix the gear that's stored on an outfit stand, otherwise the mending bills won't be able to find it. You can get around that by only allowing gear that's in perfect condition to be stored on the stand. That way colonists won't be helping themselves to whatever they fancy, nor will they be storing a piece of armour on the verge of breaking. And with that, what you've all been waiting for. Or what you've just skipped straight ahead to because who cares about all the effort I put into the rest of this video, right?
Hello darkness, my old friend.
The Gravship is the new major inclusion with Odyssey, allowing for multiple, entirely new ways of approaching and playing the game. Depending on the starting scenario you picked, you either have immediate access to a basic Gravship and the associated tech, or it's going to be something offered to you via a quest within the first 15 days or so of starting your colony. If you do not accept the Mechanoid Signal quest for the Grav Engine, the basic, standard and advanced Gravtech research will remain locked for you, as to start the chain you must first study a Grav Engine. However, the Shuttle and Orbital Tech projects will be available to all colonies regardless of if you take this quest or not, so you're not going to lock yourself out of all space content by declining the Gravship engine. For the sake of ease and clarity, we're going to assume when we go through this section that you picked any start besides the Gravship and got your hands on this engine via the quest. I'll be covering that starting scenario at the end of this section because it does have a few unique modifiers. The Grav Engine will come crashing down to your tile, accompanied by some mechanoid ship chunks, a good handful of Gravlite Panels, and some dead mechanoids. If you decline this quest, or if at any point your Gravship is completely destroyed, an engine will eventually crash onto another tile in the world, meaning you'll always have a way of claiming another Grav Engine. You'll just need to send a caravan out to pick it up. This engine only takes a few seconds to inspect, which is going to unlock access to start researching basic Gravtech for your colony, as without it, all you're going to have access to build is the Gravship substructure. So let's properly cover these parts before we open up any more options. The Grav Engine comes with a 37 by 37 sphere of influence around itself, which when selected is shown with a blue circle. You can also freely pick up and move the Grav Engine as you see fit, as well as being able to just minify it and throw it into storage for a while if you don't want to deal with building a Gravship just yet. You'll also see when initially selecting the engine it says 0 out of 500. This number is the maximum amount of foundation tiles that your Grav Engine can support with the lift that it currently generates. So whilst you have the area of effect that contains 1117 tiles around the engine, it isn't able to actually lift anything near that size to begin with. You can build over the foundational limits, but if you try and launch the Gravship when it's at say 550 out of 500, it's going to leave behind what it deems to be the least important tiles. Anything that you want to move with your Gravship when it launches must be built upon a connected substructure. So those 500 tiles of floor space will quickly start to disappear when you consider things like walls, corridors, or power, meaning you need to build as smart and efficiently as possible to begin with.
Holy shit!
Yeah.
What the fuck is this?
Yeah, okay.
Is this a bedroom?
Each of the mechanoid ship chunks that lands with the Grav Engine can be deconstructed to yield 40 steel and 15 more Gravlite Panels, so you're likely going to have a good 400 panels or more to play with right off the bat. For quite some time, acquiring Gravlite Panels is going to be a bit of a mission, as crafting them for yourself is a fairly advanced and involved task. That means make sure you're looking after these and not leaving any behind. They have a very limited number of uses, but they are basically essential to life aboard a Gravship. For now, we can use 4 steel and 1 Gravlite panel to make a single tile of substructure. You don't need to sweat deconstructing substructure or botching the construction too much, as you will always get the Gravlite panel back, but it's going to be costing you a little bit of steel every time you decide to dramatically redesign your ship layout, or let good old one-armed Bob with his whopping 2 skill in construction take a crack at laying some new floor tiles. With that cost in mind, you can already tell that a Gravship is not a cheap endeavour. If you make use of nearly all of those starting Gravlite panels, you're going to be spending at least 1,600 steel just on flooring. Thankfully, you don't need to worry about the surface that you're building this foundation on, as it works on its own unique layer, which allows it to build out from other pieces of foundation and even reach over tiles that cannot typically be traversed. The only things in the game that will stop you are geysers or structures designed to allow underground access, like a hive entrance. So we're going to assume that you've placed down some substructure and you've slapped the Grav Engine on top of it. It says that we're still missing a thruster, a fuel tank and controls, but before we go into adding any of this stuff in to make a functional ship, let's go over what we're actually going to be doing with a Gravship at this stage in the game, because it might not be quite what you'd expected. Unless you've already gone really far down the tech tree and grabbed Orbital Tech, which is pretty far ahead of basic Gravtech, it's doubtful that you're going to take a starting Gravship into space. What's far more likely is that you'll be using it to skim across the surface of the planet. As you'll be staying grounded and frequently moving, you probably need the bare necessities aboard your ship without spending a boatload of materials on excessive parts due to its limited size. Don't be afraid to build a total crap shack to begin with. A stone-walled compound will work just fine on a Gravship foundation. You probably want to focus on getting every basic need covered to start with. Build a freezer, have a stove or a paste dispenser, make a dining room, something for recreation, a barracks, conduits, batteries, a power solution or two, and a basic storeroom. Everything else you can build or place down as you need when landing. What you're going to have noticed when you accepted the Mechanoid Signal quest and studied the Grav Engine is that it unlocked a new, permanent quest in your log called the Gravship. This is always going to aim to have active quests underneath it, with it usually capping at 3. Upon completing one of the quests that it offers you, it tries to immediately refresh the list to include a new one, so you always have options with what you can approach next. These quests are what you're going to be chasing to gather up Gravlite Panels and another part called a Grav Core. As you can see with the quest that we got to begin with, they're both on the planet's surface and just a short hop from our home location. So again, we don't need to worry about making our grav ship space worthy. It just needs to be functional to begin with.
What the? Why isn't this?
Dear humans who discover this wreck, please disregard it. We crashed this ship into your planet to test new safety features because we care about our customers.
With that in mind, let's get this thing up and running for real. Unlocking basic Gravtech, we now have access to the Gravship Hull, Pilot Console, Small Chem Fuel Tank, Small Thruster, Grav Field Extender and the Grav Anchor. Let's start with the Gravship Hull and why I specifically mentioned normal walls before we unlock this. The Gravship Hull is expensive. It takes 7 metal to build, so steel will be your baseline, but you could also use bioferrite if you have a large anomaly farm, with that being substantially stronger. Of course, uranium and plasteel are options too, but we just said how expensive these walls are, so let's not get too crazy here. You're also going to need to factor in the cost of every piece of hull also requiring substructure underneath it, so rooms quickly become more expensive to make when you're also having to pay for the floor underneath your wall. The important part of installing these walls is that they will make your grav ship airtight, so if you want to go into orbit and sustain life in a meaningful way without the need for colonists to wear vac-suits constantly, you are going to need, at a minimum, the exterior of your ship to be completely encased by Gravship Hull. Interior walls could be another material if you choose, but that raises the risk of an oxygen leak if there's a breach elsewhere. So typically, if you're intending on leaving the planet's surface for an extended duration, you're going to need these walls across your entire grav ship. They do also have the unique feature of adding in corner graphics to smooth out their edges too. However, these are only visual in nature. A colonist can still walk on these tiles as normal, and the edge doesn't actually block you from placing down an exterior structure. Given that we're not going to be going into space for a little while, and we've got many other parts to gather and build before we do so, don't get caught up in feeling that you need to build these walls right away. You can absolutely have a log cabin or a stone cottage floating around on the planet's surface and do just fine. Whilst we're at this stage, there are so many other parts that need your attention and also have a high steel requirement. The walls can be put in the non-essential pile and returned to later, when the other things have been taken care of. Let's get down to the 3 parts that you're going to need to make your grav ship operational, starting with small chem fuel tanks. Only one of these is actually required to fly, but if you want to max out what your starter grav ship can achieve, it's best to build 2. Any more than that is a waste of resources and space though. Chem fuel tanks are one of the only parts of the grav ship you can build that cannot be minified and moved around as needed. So ideally pick a position you're happy with for the foreseeable future to avoid needing to deconstruct these. Throwing away half of their material cost, especially as each tank costs 120 steel to make, every time you fancy a redesign, isn't the smartest choice to make. These hold up to 250 chem fuel each, with the target rate capable of being adjusted if for some reason you didn't want them to be filled. That's why it's wasteful to use more than 2 tanks, as shelves taking up the same amount of floor space as a tank will be able to hold vastly more chem fuel. This reliance on chem fuel also means that you're likely going to want a biofuel refinery on board your grav ship at all times, so get used to converting wood or spare food over into grav ship fuel between jumps.
There's very little meat in these gym mats.
The main reason that you want 2 of these tanks is down to the maximum range that you are able to travel at this tech level. Each tile travelled is going to cost 10 chem fuel, and you'll be able to travel a maximum distance of 40 tiles, so 400 fuel. 2 tanks holds a maximum of 500, so you've got enough for 1 full distance jump and a little bit of change. You're only ever going to use as much fuel as is needed when hopping around the planet though. The engine doesn't wastefully burn through whatever fuel is stored, so you've no real reason to keep these things anything other than totally brimmed. Next up is the thrusters, which make use of that stored fuel. Your grav ship can support 4 small thrusters, with each one installed adding 10 tiles of range, leading to that number that we used before when working out fuel consumption, 40 tiles. Small thrusters are one of the more expensive parts to get down initially, costing 180 steel and 4 components each, but they can be minified and moved as needed. Just be aware that because they can be minified, it means they're fair game for raiders to take, with thrusters frequently being one of the more exposed parts on your Gravship too. So they're like a bright light to a moth, or a mobile phone to a thieving scumbag if you live in London. These engines will need to be fully placed on a foundation. The 5 mark tiles behind the thruster need to be completely clear of obstructions and substructure to function correctly. There's absolutely nothing that says that you have to have all of these thrusters facing in the same direction, nor do they need to be at the rear of your ship. You can even encircle them within the structure of your ship itself if you build in a bit of a funky way. The thrusters also work as a wall and count towards an airtight seal, so you don't need to place them fully outside of your walls. You can build your hull around them similar to how you would position a nutrient paste dispenser through your freezer. That just leaves the pilot console. You're only going to need one of these, with it taking 140 steel and 3 components. Again, doesn't matter in the slightest where you place this on your Gravship. It can be at the front, in the middle, by the thrusters, dangerously balanced at the end of a thin strip of foundations, doesn't matter. And you'll be able to move it as and when you need to if you decide that you want to reorganize your ship a little or repurpose the cockpit into a different room. The pilot's console is where you perform the launch function of your Gravship, which operates like a ritual from ideology or anomaly. So ideally you want the console accessible enough that in case of emergency, the pilot and co-pilot will be able to make it there quickly and slam on the button needed to take off. Having this be in a tricky to reach spot might just give enemies enough extra time to cause more damage or even get on board your Gravship as it takes off, which means they're going to come with you too.
I think we have them trapped, sir.
Trapped them where?
In the cargo control area.
Where?
In the cargo control area.
Let's talk in a little bit more detail about this launch mechanic then, as I know we still have other parts to cover, but by the time you have these 3 things built, it's an option for you to start moving around the planet to explore quest locations or find extra resources to further expand your Gravship. Firstly, the quality modifiers that go into launch. Each additional crew member you have outside of the pilot and co-pilot is going to add 2% to the expected quality, up to a maximum of 10%. Each small thruster is going to add an additional 1%, so 4% more if you built all of them. Then the piloting ability of both your pilot and co-pilot is taken into account, with there being potentially 30% gained from the pilot and 15% from the co-pilot. The maximum quality gain here is achieved by having a piloting skill of 250%, of which 170% can be achieved through maxing your intellectual skill alone. So to cap this out, you will need some brain implants. There are additional bonuses to this launch quality that aren't yet available for us, but I'll make sure to mention them when they come up down the line. For now, the important thing to know is, quite simply, the higher the quality of the launch, the less time it is before you can launch again, and the lower the probability that something will go wrong. Let's cover what can go wrong, because it's bound to happen a lot when you're first getting started with your Gravship. There are 4 problems that can occur if you happen to get unlucky with that percentile roll. The Gravship can land a little bit too hard and crash, causing damage to structures on board, but it's never actually enough to break anything. It just means that your builders need to spend a little bit of time blowtorching the walls to get things back in tip-top shape. The thrusters can break down, which is especially annoying. It's arguably the worst one that you can get hit with, as this is going to eat through your component storage, with a random amount of your thrusters being broken and requiring a repair. Fortunately, you'll normally find compact machinery on every new map that you travel to, so you're able to mine for new ones to offset this cost. The Grav Engine can overheat, which is going to increase the cooldown before you're able to launch again. Usually not too much of an issue, unless you've landed at a particularly dangerous site or a really boring one. Finally, there's Grav Nausea. Not a big issue here. This hits your colonist for a few hours with an effect that's incredibly similar to crypto sleep sickness, so they're going to walk around in a bit of a daze and occasionally barf. It passes quickly enough that it's not really a concern, provided you didn't land in the middle of a war zone anyway. In terms of offsetting these negative effects, it's impossible to ever completely avoid them. There's always going to be a small chance that something bad happens even at 100% ritual quality. The main breaking point for offsetting this negative is hitting 50% launch quality, as that's going to reduce the chance of a mishap to about 25%, with that remaining 25% lowering at a much more gradual rate as you get closer to a perfect launch, but it never totally disappears. The launch cooldown, however, has 4 breakpoints, as better launch quality has progressively less of an effect on how long it's going to take before you can fire up the engine again. The cooldown starts at 10 days, but it's basically impossible to have a launch that bad, as you always need at least a pilot and a thruster, which is going to provide some offset. At 25% quality, the cooldown is lowered to 5 days. Then at 50% quality, it's halved again, 2.5 days. At 80%, it gets lowered to just 1 day, and at 100% launch quality, it's only a few hours. So as you can tell, you're getting the most impactful offsets for hitting those lower early thresholds. It's why even a few percent here or there in the early game is a lot more beneficial, because it's going to be taking off an entire day or two rather than just an hour when you've got a more advanced grav ship. What does launching actually involve then? Anything on your substructure tiles is going to be taken with you. That means the walls, furniture, colonists, your pets, all of it needs to have at least 1 foot on the foundation. Anything else is going to be left behind. That is true for threats and non-hostile entities too. If raiders have made it into your grav ship and you take off, they are still going to be there when you land. If you let a trade caravan come aboard your grav ship and eat at your table, and you take off while they're mid-meal, they're coming with you too. And they're going to be extremely pissed off at you for doing so, likely turning them instantly hostile upon landing. You are given a warning about that happening though. This does mean that with the correct building plan and somewhat devious tactics, you can encourage raiders or traders to stand in a nice open platform that you've built for them, and then take off into space, seeing how well they survive without any oxygen. Spoiler alert, the answer is usually not very well. Now, there's a couple of things that you can't place on this grav ship substructure, as they're not intended to be brought with you in this manner. Deep drills will need to be uninstalled and stored if you want to make use of them from site to site, and any toxifier generators cannot be placed on substructure nor minified once made. So if you do want to use them, don't forget to deconstruct them before you leave to get some of their cost back. The reason behind this limitation on a toxifier generator might be tied to how pollution doesn't follow your grav ship either. If you pick up a bunch of waste packs and burn them on your substructure, polluting the whole thing, it's going to be totally clean when you land at the next site. This works both inside and outside of any rooms that you have in your grav ship too. The waste that you left behind is going to cause a relationship penalty for pollution dumping with the nearest faction when you choose to leave the tile. You can't even get around this limitation by taking waste packs into orbit and then lobbing them into the endless ocean, as the Traders Guild that operates all of the nearby space platforms is going to be mighty pissed off with you. Another part of taking off and landing that can be a little bit disorienting is that your entire ship can be rotated when picking the spot on the map that you would like to move to. Whilst mirroring your ship normally isn't too hard to get your head around, doing a 90-degree rotation and seeing your base from an entirely new angle is definitely odd, especially with how many hours Rimworld players have likely spent getting completely accustomed to their bases staying exactly how they left them. This is a weird sensation.
There's something wrong with the house! I don't like change!
Now, that leads us nicely into an important part to talk about, the Grav Anchor. Without one of these present on the tile that you are launching your grav ship from, things are going to get a little bit iffy for any remaining inhabitants, as in buckle your seatbelt Dorothy because Kansas is going bye-bye. The Grav Anchor is essential if you want to keep both a static colony base and use the grav ship at the same time. The DLC has been almost intentionally designed around using one or the other, and whilst both can work, the balance gets awfully squirrely really fast. The grav ship is going to let you fly out and collect a vast amount of resources in a very short time, with you also being able to design a combat-oriented ship that is perfectly built for raiding or scavenging. needing only the bare minimum of life support systems, as your main base is the thing that's going to provide your stable source of food and is handling all of your production. It's why the Grav Anchor is so expensive. At 300 plasteel, 80 Gravlite Panels and 5 advanced components. If you had the resources to build a Grav Anchor right away, it'd likely let you steamroll everything in the early game, and allow you to leapfrog basically the entire mid-game too. So it's been costed in such a way that you're already going to be fairly likely to have a well-established grav ship by the time that you settle on a location to build one of these, and lay down a more permanent colony base, which could even be established on an asteroid or at a previously abandoned orbital facility you decide to claim for yourself. Whilst launching your grav ship does utterly destroy the tile that you're departing from, weirdly it won't upset any traders or visitors that were still present, so you don't need to wait for your map to be completely vacated before taking off. The last part at this tech level is the Grav Field Extender, which is what you'll need the previously mentioned Grav Cores to build. Now, you're normally only finding Grav Cores one at a time, with each one you do find typically being accompanied by a fair amount of Gravlite Panels too. These field extenders make use of the cores, as well as 35 Gravlite Panels, 2 components and 80 steel. It expands the possibilities of what you're able to place aboard your grav ship, by increasing the substructure that the engine can support by 250, and extending the range that you're able to build out to, up to a maximum of 6 times. That means that it's most upgraded, your Grav Engine with the help of these field extenders can support 2,000 tiles of substructure. The extenders themselves do need to be placed within the range of the main engine, as in you can't daisy chain them off one another to make a really long narrow ship, with the amount of floor space that optimally placed field extenders actually provide far exceeding how many tiles of substructure you would ever be able to lay down. So don't panic over placing these perfectly, as each one is increasing the amount of tiles you can actually use by 250, while its area of effect is providing 885 tiles worth of building extension. I'm sure there's an exact method online as to where to place these to get the most bang for your buck possible, but even if you do what I do and simply aim for the furthest edges of the engine, it gets you around 3,500 tiles of space to play with, more than enough for your 2,000 substructure limit. So that's basic Gravtech, and your loop for a little while is likely to be head towards a quest site that rewards a grav core, expand your ship a little bit more, gear up some more, rinse, repeat. Eventually you'll want to expand your ship to be a bit more capable. This is where standard Gravtech comes in, branching on from basic Gravtech and also using microelectronics. This will unlock you just 2 parts, the large chem fuel tank and the large thruster. The large tank is super straightforward. 200 steel for 750 storage, rather than the small version's 120 steel that gave 250. Of course, this thing is taking up more space. It's a 3x3 rather than a 2x2, and it falls into the same line of thinking as the small storage too. One of these will not be enough to support the furthest distance you can reach with a full set of thrusters, but more than 2 large tanks is a waste of space, as the furthest distance you can travel is soon to be 136 tiles, which in chem fuel is 1,360 units. For now, anyway. The other part, of course, is the large thrusters. These aren't replacing your small thrusters either, they work alongside one another. Each of these costs 220 steel, 50 Vacstone blocks, and 6 components. Now, I mentioned Vacstone a lot earlier in the rundown, so if you've already forgotten what it is, or if you skipped that section to get right to the Gravship stuff, Vacstone is only obtainable from asteroids in the orbital layer. So now you have a bit of a dilemma, as there's quite a few approaches you can take to acquiring this. Either you get your grav ship fully orbital ready before getting your large thrusters, which allows you to take it directly to an asteroid to grab the stone needed to build everything, or you make sure that everyone aboard has a vac suit, which saves you needing to upgrade the ship to be completely airtight with oxygen pumps and heaters, but it's going to take a bunch of time getting all of those vac suits made for everyone aboard your ship. So, do you instead go the route of a transport pod or a shuttle? That way you only need vac suits on the colonists that you're sending to the asteroid, and there's normally at least 2 ancient transport pods present on them. So even if you send a one-way pod, you do still have a method of launching your colonists back, along with any chunks or blocks that you processed directly on the asteroid. Of course, it's easier if you sent a shuttle, but that's significantly more expensive to build and research. So pick your poison here. None of these options are exactly easy, they all require more investment into other tech that you won't have obtained by mainlining Gravtech research.
We lost something. Not to worry, we are still flying half a ship.
So let's assume that you got your hands on some Vacstone through whichever method you landed on using. You can install up to 6 large thrusters aboard your Gravship. So if you needed a number on how much Vacstone to go and farm, at least 300. Preferably more to cover for any botched construction or losses to particularly vicious raids later on. With each one of these thrusters expanding your range by 16 tiles. A full complement of large thrusters is going to provide 96 additional range. When combined with your small thrusters, that's a maximum travel distance of 136 tiles. What you're going to notice when you start building these is that quest sites also generate at much larger distances too. The game does its best not to make it completely trivial for you to hop from site to site and get ludicrously rich in a matter of days. And with each jump costing significantly more in chem fuel, you need more organic material than ever to process through. If you're not careful about this, it's going to rapidly turn your Gravship into a floating treasure chest because of all of your stored materials. So expect raids to pick up quite dramatically when you start rolling around at this level of technology. You might want to make sure that you have some form of interior placement for these thrusters to keep them safe from thieving raiders or incoming attacks due to their value. But they do require slightly more space to be left open behind them than the small variant did. Rather than a 1x5 line, it's a 2x7. A final note on these thrusters is that installing them also provides a bonus to your launch ritual quality, with each one granting 3%, so 18% more in total, making it likely that you're going to have nice quick cooldowns between firing up the engine and landing. So even if you do happen to get hit with a particularly nasty raid, you're more likely to be in a better position to take off again and leave them far behind.
Oh, you lousy Springfielder, you shake harder, boy!
We're going to stick to going down the Gravtech line of research first, before we double back to cover Orbital Tech and then the shuttle. The final tier of Gravtech requires fabrication to have been researched as well, and it unlocks the ability to produce your own Gravlite Panels rather than needing to scavenge for them, as well as pilot assistant implants, Gravcore power cells, and the signal jammer. If you want to make your own Gravlite Panels, it certainly isn't cheap. They're produced at the fabrication bench, with each one taking a single unit of plasteel and 5 Vacstone blocks, as well as needing 30 work to make just one. This is why there is some logic in making an orbital base supported with Grav Anchor aboard an asteroid. It'll give you all the Vacstone you could ever need, and by extension, all of the Gravlite panels that your ship will ever need to be fully upgraded and kitted out. If you can find an asteroid that's also got some pockets of plasteel, all the better. Unfortunately, the ground penetrating scanner does not work on asteroids, so you'll be unable to find any further materials at this base once the asteroid has been completely exhausted. So you might want to get a trade empire of some form established on its surface, to make sure you always have a supply of silver or trade goods to gain access to the materials that it will require to stay working. You'll notice that whilst you can produce panels, grav cores are something that is always outside of your reach. You'll need to continue scavenging those from sites if you want to keep building new parts like the Grav Core power cell. This needs 1 core, 50 panels, 2 advanced components and 60 steel, and whilst that might seem expensive, it's also one of the most powerful parts included with Odyssey. This somewhat unassuming little nubbin produces 1200 watts of power, constantly, as long as it's placed on substructure. The Gravship doesn't need to be in orbit, the engine doesn't need to be ready to fire, the cells just work. That means if you're not actively making use of a Gravship engine and tend to use a shuttle for all of your travel needs, you can have the Gravship engine with a block of substructure surrounded by these grav cores powering your entire base. It's a solid use of those cores and the panels that you would otherwise have no real need for. Vanometric power cells are always insanely valuable as a reward because of their consistent output without any requirement, and these Gravcore power cells are half the size and provide more output. Given that you won't have access to geothermals aboard a Gravship, you always end up with one of 3 problems. 1. You have to use renewable power sources like solar, which means saturating a huge amount of your extremely valuable floor space with them, as well as requiring a large bank of batteries on the ship too. 2. You use chem fuel generators, which are fairly cost and space efficient, but it means you always need matter to turn into fuel to keep your generators topped up, with something like hydroponics consuming more power than it can meaningfully produce in biomass. So you need to stop at forests constantly to harvest wood or go and hunt for meat. 3. You build power sources whenever you land, such as a large group of tox generators or landing near to a geothermal so you can hook it up to your ship, which costs you resources every time you move because 50% of it is disappearing with deconstruction, and it limits where you can land in some circumstances too. These power cells fix every one of these issues, being space efficient and producing completely free, reliable energy. Once you unlock them, I fully expect that you'll spend the next few grav cores you acquire replacing all of your power generation aboard the ship so that you can run solely on these.
In this house, we obey the laws of thermodynamics!
The piloting assistant is a part made at the fabrication bench, with a slightly different cost than we're used to seeing on implants, as it's just 10 plasteel and 2 advanced components, making it really cheap to produce. You're only ever going to need 2 of these realistically, one for your pilot and one for your co-pilot. Fortunately, the implants have quite a low market value, so they'll frequently appear as a quest reward early on, and they're easy enough to pick up from an exotic trader. This 45% increase to piloting ability is applied before the intelligence modifier, so whilst 20 intellectual provides 170% piloting, with an implant installed that jumps to 247%, which is a 77% increase, as that 45% is being multiplied by 170%. Makes sense, right? The only thing left to do to get your piloting skill to hit that max of 250% is to find a means of reliably increasing your consciousness before takeoff. There's a few easy ones to grab depending on other expansions that you have access to. Neural superchargers give a 10% bonus, psychic bonds from high mates are 15%, wasters or anyone with a pollution stimulus gene can gain another 5%, or you could just take a quick hit of wake up or go juice and roll the dice on a random overdose chance. The final part to build here is the signal jammer. This is a requirement to visit 2 certain orbital locations that are guarded by defences that would otherwise tear your ship to shreds. This structure costs 1 grav core, 200 steel, 80 Gravlite Panels and 4 advanced components, so it's pretty hefty in its cost. Although if you choose to raid the places it grants you access to, it might quickly make its investment back in terms of the loot that you can now obtain. One thing you've likely noticed with this whole section is the lack of any real power requirements for Gravship specific structures. Whilst all of your other structures like production, research, temperature regulation or security options are going to need electricity, everything related to the Gravship doesn't really give a crap. As long as it's got chem fuel to throw at it, it's happy. The pilot console is going to work, the thrusters will still fire and your signal jammer will keep you safe. So, as weird as it seems, it's possible to build and run a Gravship that never leaves the planet's surface and operates without electricity. Wood burning stoves, torch lamps, simple pieces of recreation, and a few cozy bedrooms. Is it stupid? Absolutely, but nobody said that your Gravship needed to make sense. The parts of your Gravship that do require power are tucked in with Orbital Tech. This can be researched after completing microelectronics, unlocking both gear for your colonists and 3 structures that help aboard the Gravship and in day-to-day colony life. This also seems like the right place to talk about vacuum exposure and how it affects your colonists.
Here I come, motherfucker!
First up, vac suits. You have the helmet, standard suit and kids suit. I've seen some understandable aggravation with the implementation of the kids and adult suits, because when kids grow up their vac suit magically springs off their body and they run the risk of being exposed to vacuum burns or even asphyxiation. So before going into the stats around these suits, let's cover how dangerous the environment that you'll be using them in can be. Kids can survive and grow up aboard a Gravship, or on an orbital colony, but I personally wouldn't do that without also having an airtight build with functioning oxygen pumps and temperature regulation in place. Vac suits are there as a fallback or a fail-safe, not as a primary source of protection. There are multiple parts to consider when in space, as vacuum exposure hits you in 2 different ways, as well as hypothermia also being a risk. Firstly then, let's talk vacuum burns. If a body part is not covered by a piece of gear that provides vacuum resistance, it begins to take vacuum burns. Gear that provides this protection includes vac suits, recon armor, marine armor, cataphract armor, and mech lord and mech commander gear. Vacuum burns are also completely negated with the vacuum resistant gene, as well as the Archean capsule breathless gene. Whilst these vacuum burns are never serious in terms of the damage they cause and pose no risk of scarring, even when they affect delicate areas like the eyes, ears, fingers or toes, they are more painful than ordinary wounds of an equal severity, which can easily lead to a colonist affected by multiple burns being slowed or even collapsing, making them unable to escape being hit by more burns and the other risks that the vacuum can pose. The other easy part to cover before talking about the vacuum exposure health effect is, of course, hypothermia. The majority of gear that provides vac resistance also grants a large amount of cold insulation, far more than it did before the release of Odyssey. That's to try and help with the minus 75°C temperatures you'll be facing in the orbital layer. Now, if someone is wandering around without any kind of protection, they're likely going to succumb to other problems before the hypothermia gets them, but someone in low quality armour will still have the same amount of vacuum resistance as someone in normal gear would, with it granting less cold tolerance as that offset is impacted by quality. So whilst you might be able to get your vacuum resistance high enough to avoid that risk, shonky armour that's held together with gaffer tape could lead to a bit of frostbite if you're not careful. Finally then, we have vacuum exposure itself. This has 6 levels of exposure, but one of them's kinda hidden. You won't see the quote unquote first rank of vacuum exposure show up until it's already at 15%. There is a stage before that that's being tracked, it just isn't displayed on your health tab. This vacuum exposure builds up at a rate of 2% per second before any resistance is taken into consideration. So a colonist without any kind of protective gear is dead in 50 seconds. That's not a lot of time, as it takes 15 seconds to put on a vac suit and a further 4 to equip a helmet. From 15 to 30% vacuum exposure, there's a 5% consciousness loss and 5% pain, plus any vacuum burns that the colonist is taking at the same time. 30% to 50% is a loss of 10% consciousness and 8% pain. At 50 to 85%, this jumps to 20% consciousness loss and 10% pain, before the colonist collapses upon hitting 85% severity, with their consciousness maxed at 10%. If vacuum exposure is ever allowed to hit 100%, just like living in the UK with the Online Safety Act, it's game over for that pawn.
Oh damn. Oh damn. Oh damn!
And that is 3 oh dams. Oh damn!
You might notice that for a colonist that has no genetic vacuum resistance, the only way to achieve 100% is to wear both the Vacsuit helmet and Vacsuit, or the Vacsuit and Cataphract helmet. Everything else is always going to be just a few % off providing full resistance. It's that way by design. It means if you send your colonists into orbit with a shuttle or a transport pod, you need to weigh up if you want them to be there for a long time, using Vacsuits that can get you a larger haul, at the risk of being slow and less protected if a raid turns up, or better armoured and quicker, but working against the hard timer of vacuum exposure ticking up too high. There are more considerations when going into orbit than just how much food they need to travel with. From what I've noticed in testing as well, when rescuing colonists that have collapsed due to vacuum exposure, it appears that whilst they're being carried by a colonist that is protected in a vac suit, this protection also is passed along to the colonist that they're carrying. So fingers crossed, if someone goes down, you'll be able to rescue them safely. Outside of the protection and needs of a colonist in space too, there are also a few changes to certain mechanics that are only active whilst you're in a vacuumed environment. Mortars can't be used in space because of Newton's first law. An object in motion stays in motion unless acted on by an outside force. That means if you fire a hunk of metal, it keeps going until it hits something. That can be a ship or a planet behind that ship. It might go off into deep space and hit somebody else in 10,000 years' time. If you pull the trigger on it, you are ruining somebody else's day, somewhere and sometime. You'll also find that fires are rapidly extinguished as there's no oxygen to fuel its burn, and smoke will rapidly disperse, making it extremely difficult to shield yourself from automated defences. Toxic gas also dissipates incredibly quickly, but this is far less impactful because the majority of suits that provide vacuum resistance also protect people from environmental toxins too. Anyway, on to actually covering vac suits now that we've talked about what they're protecting you from. The kid Vacsuit and adult Vacsuit provide identical armour, coverage, insulation and offsets, with the difference being in material cost and the work required to make. The child version takes 3 components, 45 steel and 10 plasteel. The adult version uses the same 3 components, but doubles the steel and plasteel cost. The suit is providing the lower percentage of vacuum resistance of the 2 parts that you're going to need to wear to keep yourself safe in space, with it also applying all of the movement speed penalty. So whilst you can get a good amount of vacuum resistance wearing just the helmet and making a run for it, more body parts are exposed to burns, and you're also getting a huge amount of cold insulation from wearing the vac suit too, so expect a hypothermia build-up pretty quickly. The helmet fits on both adults and children, costing just 2 components and 40 steel, making these incredibly easy to mass produce. They provide 80% toxic environment resistance and 69% vacuum resistance. Nice. These actually work quite well in places like the Scarlands too. On top of it providing full head coverage with 52% sharp armor, they're also affordable and accessible as an armor option rather than using flak helmets or needing to go all the way to marine armor. A quick dip into picking up Orbital Tech purely for these helmets can be quite beneficial, as the next tier of headgear is at least 10,000 more research points into the tree, and nobody uses recon helmets, which means it's actually 16,000. Besides the vac suits then, you also have some structures. The Orbital Scanner works roughly the same way as the ground penetrating scanner. It needs to be hooked up to a power source and left unroofed, with this being completely automatic in its scanning. Eventually it'll stumble across an orbital site for you to go and visit, which could be all manner of things. An abandoned station, an ore-rich asteroid, or even a mechanoid platform. Taking just 180 steel, 6 components and 2 advanced components, getting one of these operational ASAP is well worth the investment if you're intending to spend any amount of time in orbit exploring POIs, as it'll also help in filling out the empty space between existing locations so that hopefully you get to spend less time needing to return to the planet to land, purely to launch yourself back into space to cover longer distances. The oxygen pump does what its name suggests, filling the room that it's built inside with life-giving O2 for the lovely low cost of just 100 steel, 2 components, and 150 watts of power whilst in use. If you're on the planet's surface, or if the room that the pump is installed in is already saturated with oxygen, it drops into standby mode and only uses 15 watts of power instead. Oxygen pumps do have a specific output that isn't really explained to the player. Obviously with all these numbers it's expected that you're using the O2 pump on an airtight ship, so that the atmosphere isn't instantly leaking through cracks in the walls, as well as likely needing to make use of vac barriers to mitigate seepage through doorways that lead off the ship. Each oxygen pump produces 1% pressure per second over 100 tiles. The pressure that it outputs is working directly against vacuum percentage, with 0% vacuum meaning the room is pressurized and safe to inhabit. That's in terms of vacuum exposure anyway. It could still be extremely cold if you didn't install heaters. Once pressurized in this manner, the pump will go into standby mode until it's needed again. Breaking down that math a little bit more, if a pump is built in a room that is 20 tiles in size, it provides 5% pressure every second. If you use a single pump in a room that's 200 tiles in size, it provides 0.5 pressure every second. Oxygen pumps can work together, as well as being able to equalize pressure across rooms that are connected by an open doorway or a vent. You can get super nerdy about it if you really wanted to by checking how much substructure you've placed versus how many tiles are occupied by walls or doors, which gives you a rough number to work in terms of open floor space. To be honest though, I was just throwing one of these in every large room and letting vents do the work for smaller rooms, like bedrooms. I probably did waste a good chunk of power and materials, but I had ample to burn by the time my ship was fully operational and orbital. Lastly, there's the Vac Barrier. This is your airtight door option, with it being less of a door and more of a corridor.
It's so nice to see other people having to hear this. It's really just bringing everything into sharp perspective.
Each Vac Barrier costs 40 steel, 2 components and 2 Gravlite Panels, consuming 50 watts of power whilst operational and only 5 watts of power when it isn't required. Enemies can absolutely saunter right through these, so if you're using them to seal the entrance to your ship, you still want a standard door, or even better, an auto door behind them. That way the atmosphere is being blocked by the Vac Barrier and intruders can't just waltz right in. These barriers allow you to build areas inside your grav ship without a ceiling above them too, rather than hanging them off the side of your ship and leaving them open to attack, such as solar farms, a shuttle landing pad, or even a transport pod launch site. These doors are also ludicrously good at temperature regulation, for all colonies, not just those making use of a grav ship. They aren't restricted to being placed on substructure, so you can implement them wherever you would like, with placing just one making a phenomenal fridge or freezer. Whilst I'm aware that it might seem counterintuitive, the barrier that these produce block a significant amount of temperature bleed, without actually needing to physically open and close like a traditional door, meaning a colonist can stroll right in and out of your freezer without any slowdown. So all of the upsides of an auto door for 90% of the power cost. Not only that, because there isn't a physical door opening and closing, there are far less spikes in the ambient temperature of the room and its surrounding environment, meaning your coolers are having far less power spikes when aiming to maintain their target temp. It even allows you to keep an airlock between the freezer and exterior room at a more comfortable ambient temperature, so if this is where you normally place your butcher table, it might not have a work speed penalty. The opposite can also be true for these vac doors, as raiders can freely move through them. What if the corridor that they were going to walk through suddenly became rather toasty? The AI is normally going to make raiders take the route that is the easiest open path to your base. By the time that burns and heat strokes start to kick in, it's already too late for them. Obviously this is only a tactic that works on humanoid raids that try and charge straight at you, but it is pretty damn effective, if somewhat tedious to build and clean. So that's the Orbital Tech, onto the shuttle. This comes in with a project of its own, needing the transport pod to have been researched as well as the multi-analyzer, so it's fairly far down the tech tree, which does make sense. It's incredibly powerful for every colony that gets its hands on one. That's also been reflected in its price. It needs 250 steel, 150 plasteel, 6 components and 1 new part with the DLC, the shuttle engine. These engines are both expensive to buy and rare to find. You'll sometimes have them offered by orbital traders, but they're more reliably scavenged from a crashed shuttle. If you have the royalty DLC, you'll be able to accept quests that drop one of these on your tile. You also don't really want to sit on too many of these engines in storage, with each one being 2,500 silver. It's not an insignificant amount of wealth to just leave laying around. These shuttles are capable of holding 500 kilograms worth of cargo or colonists, so 3 transport pods and a little bit extra in old Rimworld money. Not only that, the gizmos that they come with were smart enough to allow you to load additional fuel onto the shuttle as cargo and refuel it automatically from its stockpile. I know that sounds like a really small thing, but honestly it's such a helpful feature. It allows you to kit this thing up for hundreds of tiles worth of travel with no annoying micromanagement to have it achieve it. Regardless of the distance that you choose to travel with the shuttle, it's always going to burn a minimum of 50 chem fuel. Once you go further than 16 tiles, this begins to rise, costing 3 chem fuel per tile travelled with a maximum range of 62. So that means a fully fueled shuttle, even without any extra chem fuel in storage, is capable of comfortably doing a max distance round trip. Not only that, the shuttle's cooldown is super short. It only needs 1 in-game hour to be ready to launch again. There are a few restrictions around the weather that may prevent you from taking off, however, with things like sandstorms or blizzards keeping you grounded until conditions clear up and make it safer to take off. The shuttle is surprisingly god tier for snug landings, with zero need for a runway or any other clearance besides the immediate exit, so you can safely build a 5x3 spot on your grav ship for a shuttle and it'll have no problem sticking the landing every single time. As for their functionality, there's very little a shuttle can't do. Perfect for trade missions, ideal for quickly visiting a simple world quest, and exceptional for emergency reinforcements without needing to send an entire grav ship, if you're using a Grav Anchor somewhere of course. Just be aware that enemies can be dicks at times and the shuttle counts as a passable structure. It means weapons like grenades and rockets do increased damage against it. If you get seriously caught out of position when attacking an enemy site, get in and bail rather than trying to kite enemies around it. It will be destroyed more quickly than you think, and then those colonists are left seriously up a certain shitty creek without a paddle. So that about covers all of the tech. What about the grav ship starting scenario? The one that gives you a bit of a freebie to start with. You'll be handed an extremely basic grav ship setup. 2 thrusters, 2 fuel tanks, a pilot console and the engine. as well as a small simple foundation surrounded by hull walls and some shelves. Whilst your colonists do start this scenario wearing vac suits, you're unlikely to be able to stay in orbit for any meaningful amount of time at the beginning, as to get your hands on resources to actually start building and surviving, you likely need to come down to the planet and get mining, chopping and hunting. The even more interesting part of this scenario is the inclusion of the unique pursuing mechanoids condition, which is available via the scenario editor for any other colony you would like to play. With this setting enabled, you'll be sent a warning when you've been on the tile for too long. Mechanoids have narrowed down your position and they are sending a strike team your way. Obviously extremely focused towards a nomadic playstyle, this threat's not only going to ensure that you stay on your toes, it also gives you a more definitive reason to aim for the mech hive endgame, as dealing with that threat will stop the pursuing mechanoids mechanic, allowing you to finally put down some roots, if you choose to do so anyway. Before we talk about the mech hive, let's go over the other quests that Odyssey includes and the orbital locations associated with them. We already know about the Mechanoid Signal quest that drops the Grav Engine on your tile, as well as the overarching Gravship quest that continues to provide specific Gravship focused subquests for you, so that you've always got a source of Grav cores and panels to build and expand with. However, Odyssey is right up there with royalty in terms of the quantity of quests that the expansion is adding to the game, with Odyssey actually beating it out for top spot, even without needing to count the Gravship specific ones. We'll do the more general quests first, as it covers a lot of new locations too. One cool part to mention in this is that you can now be given quests by visitors to your tile. Interacting with a trader or wanderer has a chance for them to provide you a little bit of gossip and unlock a quest site on your world map. So even if you're not really interested in what they're selling, it's always worth hitting them up to see if they have any leads for you. Let's cover the general quests that you can find on the planet's surface then, before going into orbit for space quests and covering the new points of interest that you're going to interact with. First off is the Infested Settlement. These are, generally speaking, not too horrific. You're going to be fighting your way through an ancient structure that's been taken over by insects, with a few hives and your usual assortment of defenders. No worries about finding queens here though. The gross looking insect walls that you'll find are extremely easy to break and will trigger a small chain reaction across nearby walls too. Not only that, if you assign a colonist to destroy a chunk of wall, they will continue to destroy all nearby walls once that first target's been dealt with, making it far easier to clear a path through these tiles. Just make sure when doing this they're not getting too trigger happy and opening a room that you didn't actually want them to deal with just yet. Like most structure exploration quests, it's best to either leave doors held open as you progress through to prevent them blocking your escape routes, or deconstructing them entirely to help avoiding any potential internal fires growing out of control, which could destroy the loot that you're here to collect. What you're going to find at this site and a lot of the other new quest sites as well are specific boxes, crates and caches, pallets of survival meals or medicine, boxes of components, advanced components, steel or scrap, containers that are full of chem fuel. You might find a safe or two that contains some gold or silver, or occasionally something even more valuable. As well as these more specifically named cases, you're also going to find generic sealed loot crates that come in one of two sizes. 1x1s that contain all manner of standard loot, weapons, expensive materials, implants, sentience catalysts, drugs, seeds, architect gizmos, books, or even the new quest maps, which can lead to even more loot when you read them a few times. You'll find that it won't unlock the quest opportunity immediately, so if you do want to grab the quest contained within it straight away, you're going to have to force a colonist to read it maybe 4 or 5 times in a row. Then there are potentially larger sealed containers that you can open, with these having a chance to contain structures. And we're back into talking about the Gravship. Oh yeah, round 2. You didn't think I've forgotten about these bits, right? There are 3 additional parts that you can obtain for your Gravship that are only available as a quest reward or stored within these loot boxes. Those are the pilot sub-persona cores, fuel optimizers and shield generators. Starting out with the pilot cores, your ship is able to support 2 of these, with each one providing a huge 15% to the ritual quality when you take off. That means a single core is providing as much of an offset as a perfect quality co-pilot. So if you see a quest that's offering these as a reward, jump on it. It'll make the biggest difference by far to how fast and reliably you're able to fly around the globe. These are going to require a little bit of power to function though, unlike most other parts attached to your Gravship that relate to launch procedures. It is only 30 watts, which is the same as a wall lamp, but it does mean you're going to need some kind of reliable power source on your ship. Next is the fuel optimizers. Again, these can be installed in a pair, with each one increasing efficiency of your chem fuel consumption by 30%. So 1 drops your travel cost to 7 per tile, and 2 makes your Gravship almost as cheap to use as a shuttle, at just 4 chem fuel per tile. It makes a huge difference when you're doing max distance jumps, with it going from costing 1,360 to just 544. Once you've got 2 of these aboard your Gravship, if you wanted to, you could even drop down to just having 1 large tank, as that's going to be storing enough to do the job all by itself. That just leaves the shield generators. Now, these do need to be installed on substructure, but depending on how you are using your Gravship, or in this example not using it, you can make a pretty wonky looking setup in a permanent base that lets you utilize these in defense. You're allowed to place a maximum of 2 of these per Gravship, and they cover a pretty substantial area in their dome, although depending on your building style and placement of these shields, they might not quite cover everything. This shield recharges around 2 points per second with a maximum capacity of 500, and it's going to need 200 watts of power to function once aboard your ship. The shield itself, however, is the best of all worlds. It blocks both high and low projectiles, as well as letting you shoot out of it without penalty. That gives you options when your ship is sieged, as you're never going to have access to solid roofing that will protect you from mortar shells. This also safely lets you exit your Gravship when there are hostile forces outside your front door. Just be aware that the shield does require at least 100 energy to be stored before it can be activated, as well as the activation itself requiring a colonist to physically interact with the device, so you still need your shields to be accessible once aboard your ship. You don't want to place them inside of solid walls. Whilst the shield is active, it no longer recharges any points and it lasts a maximum of 100 seconds, with it being broken instantly by a single EMP shell or by taking enough damage to bring its energy to 0. If you no longer need the shield active, you can manually deactivate it with the gizmo button, which might come in handy as the shield does have a 4-hour cooldown before it can be used again once it's been broken or disabled. So if you're going to use this against waves of enemies, turning it off proactively might just let you squeeze in a quick recharge for another round of its protection. Back to questing anyway. The infested settlement was easy enough, so let's cover the Alpha Thrumbo sighting next. This site is going to be really standard outside of the animals that have spawned here. There isn't a structure or a specific type of map generated for the encounter, so it's up to you if you want to build some kind of crazy trap before engaging with the Thrumbo, or just take it head on and use overwhelming firepower. The Alpha Thrumbo itself is always going to be flanked by a bunch of regular Thrumbo, but they aren't tethered together in any way. So if you bide your time a little bit, they'll eventually wander apart, and that gives you an opportunity to take them down one by one, rather than engaging with them as a group. Not only that, whilst the Alpha is an absolute menace if you piss it off, it's not immune to psychic effects. So if you have a spare shock lance, it will one-shot it, allowing you to either finish it off with a hunting order or capture it in hopes of taming it. Just remember that a lance isn't without risk. If you're hoping to take it alive, it might be left with a little bit of brain damage. Now we have a series of quest sites located to the Ancients faction, starting with Ancient Mercenaries. This quest is always an opportunity to score a unique weapon, as the leader of the mercenaries is equipped with one. As well as that, you'll also find similar supplies to the Infested Settlement quest within their compound, although it's usually a little bit lighter on the small and large sealed crates, so it's typically going to be resources rather than big chunky loot. Because you'll be facing Ancients at this location, it's best to bring strong weapons and even stronger armour. They'll normally be roaming the corridors with fully automatic firearms, clad in synthread or hyperweave clothes, overlaid with plasteel armour. It can be especially lucrative if you're able to down some of these Ancients, rather than outright killing them, to take their gear as well. Just be aware that at higher threat levels, they're not afraid to pop powerful stimulants like Wake Up, Go Juice or Yayo before engaging with you in combat, which means the only way they normally go down is when you drop them forever. If that mercenary site seemed a little bit light on loot to you, there's also the Ancient Garrison. This won't have active defenders, but it will have automated turrets and traps present. What you need to be careful of here is one of the traps glancing the Crypto Sleep caskets and waking up the Ancients whilst you're in a less than ideal position. The Ancients that pop out of these caskets are similar to what you'll find in an Ancient Danger. As in, they're going to be carrying a pocket full of jade, gold, plasteel components or drugs for you to loot once they're downed. They're also, understandably, counted as being on the same team as the garrison's defences, so if you wake them up and expect the hunter drones, turrets or roaming sentries to clear them up for you, it doesn't work that way. In terms of loot, these sites are incredibly generous, often featuring shelves full of weapons and crates packed with shells for use in mortars, or IEDs. This is also likely to be the location that you encounter ancient security terminals, which have a couple of uses. Provided you can see a hostile turret, these have a chance to either disable it or convert it to your side. If there are no turrets visible to you, these will instead attempt to unlock a security door, with terminals taking less time to hack than a secure door. On the flip side to that, pretty much anybody can hack a secure door, but the terminal needs an intelligence of 8 to interact with. Basically, if you can hack these, don't use them as soon as you see them, because they're more useful when they can nullify a turret for you rather than simply opening a door. So from the garrison, let's head over to the Chemfuel refinery. These places are normally totally abandoned, but still feature the odd security system or two, so keep an eye out for drones, sentries and turrets. The real risk of course in this place is hunter drones, because it's a Chemfuel refinery and it's full of fuel and explosive props. Missed shots and explosions within its walls will pretty much ensure that you ain't getting shit to take home with you. You're likely to find a storeroom with chem fuel on the shelves, as well as multiple canisters that can be opened for additional fuel, as well as the site often having a lot of biofuel refineries that you can either use whilst you're there, or deconstruct for a good chunk of materials. Be on the lookout for small mining charges and large explosive crates too. Whilst they don't really do much in terms of mining, they certainly make a mess if they explode in a room that also has puddles of fuel all over the floor. If you want to, you can pick up the smaller charges and utilise them in elaborate setups to take down traders or big beasties in one swift blow. On to the launch site next. If these locations are starting to sound a little bit familiar to you, that's because you don't always need a quest to visit them. These are present as landmarks out and about in the world, so if you settle on a tile that states it has one of these present, you've now got a pretty good idea of what you're getting yourself in for by watching this section of the video. Launch sites are considerably more barren than the Chemfuel refinery, so whilst they will contain some fuel for you to scavenge, they lack the biofuel refineries and typically feature unstable fuel nodes as their risk factor. As long as you're getting into these sites, looting and getting straight out, there's relatively little risk here, compared to some of the other sites anyway. That brings us to the Ancient Warehouse. These are normally guarded entirely by automated defences, featuring loot boxes, mystery crates and more often than not, fully furnished rooms that you can take in their entirety, fitted with armchairs, sofas, billiards tables, televisions, chess tables, poker tables. So if you get the chance to visit an ancient warehouse early on, you can have an extremely high value rec room established almost instantly, which will do wonders in providing a mood buff across your entire colony every single day. The last ancient site brings us rather handily into Orbit, the abandoned platform. Now, if you're willing to put in a little bit of graft into restoring these places, they are easily one of the best spots to live if you want an orbital base. They come ready-made with life support units, which not only provide oxygen to the station, they also act like a geothermal generator of sorts, outputting 3,200 watts of power each and keeping the room heated. So once you find one of these stations with a layout that you like, you only need to put in a little bit of work to clear out the debris, fix the broken walls, maybe vent through to the rooms that don't have a support unit, and establish some more defined workspaces. Of course, it's never quite as simple as just settling straight in. You're going to need to work your way through the corridors, clearing out traps, sentries and turrets, as well as dealing with any ancients in their crypto sleep caskets. But you can truly make this place your own. These locations will also feature a new type of loot box, the malfunctioning transport pod. These can contain long dead ancients or occasionally goodies that never made it off the platform. They even frequently come with sun lamps and hydroponics already installed. Just be aware that if you've got OCD with your building, this place is going to trigger you like crazy, because you won't be able to build those fortified walls that the complex uses. You're going to have to patch it up with something else, and it's never going to look quite right.
Why don't you look for the areas where the walls are a different color?
If you wanted to go the route of replacing the fortified walls, you can't deconstruct them either, with each one boasting 7,500 health. It'll take an entire year of hacking away to swap everything over. Dev mode has your back if this is driving you nuts though. Just spawn the tiles in where required rather than hating your base over some of them being odd. It honestly isn't worth the aggro. As well as these abandoned ancient platforms, you also have mechanoid platforms. These are considerably less hospitable towards human life, as they have no need for oxygen or heat. So make sure you're wearing gear that provides adequate protection for extended ventures into these locations. The layouts of mechanoid platforms are usually more separated, with extremely thin winding corridors between larger sections, rather than a fully interconnected complex style of building that the ancients used. As you would expect, you'll be facing mechanoid threats in these locations, as well as mini slugger turrets. Pay very close attention to rooms that contain structures called mech vats. These can appear in two states, glowing red or dark. The glowing pods still contain a mechanoid threat and will randomly barf it out during your stay on the tile. You can avoid this threat by breaking the pod open early, which ejects the mech and temporarily stuns them, giving you an opportunity to clear them up. It's best to have one colonist battering the pod so that your entire firing squad isn't triggering their ranged cooldown at the same time, as you want them to jump right onto the mech when it appears, not waste any time setting up another shot. These locations will often have weapons in their sealed and hermetic crates, though it isn't a guarantee. They also often come with a room full of mechanoid drop pods that you can make use of yourself when sending materials, scrap, or even colonists back to base or another tile as needed. Given the weight of mechanoid corpses and steel scrap, you can easily burn through a lot of these if you do use them to send back junk for recycling. From mechanoid-owned platforms, now we have unmanned satellites. These are heavily fortified in comparison to other sites of the same difficulty rating, with uranium slug turrets and autocannons around the exterior, as well as a much greater density of drones, turrets and sentries on the interior. Don't take the word unmanned in the name of this site lightly. They're one of the harder locations to scavenge and you will need to turn up prepared. They are well worth it though, with even the outer ring offering you around 30 solar panels worth of steel and components if you get to work deconstructing them. Whilst I also don't want to say it's a definitive thing, I'm fairly certain with my experience checking these sites that they always spawn with at least one sealed container that has the potential to contain a unique Gravship upgrade. So these sites are especially valuable if you're trying to fully kit out your ride. You might also notice while exploring that certain orbital sites generate with a vent in the wall, leading to a tiny hidden pocket. If you break open this vent, you will find a hidden stash behind it, so it's well worth getting into good habits in terms of either scouring the location manually or using the search function to look for words like box, crate, container, safe and vent. It'll help make sure you didn't miss anything before you move on. Whilst the layout of these platforms is seriously cool and gives you all kinds of options in terms of how you can abuse the AI pathfinding, making ridiculous kill boxes that has people doing all kinds of stupid loops, they are very limited in floor space, making it difficult to establish a space habitat here. Onto the orbital wreckage next. This place is quite simply a disaster to explore. It's massive and mainly full of junk, occasionally housing some hostile scavengers that beat you to the punch, so you'll need to deal with them before you painstakingly open all of the doors in a hope that it's not yet another room full of rubble, empty shelves or cardboard boxes. Again, this is another site that seriously benefits from using the search function to find boxes rather than doing it manually. The one thing this place does have going for it is that it usually houses a spare Vacsuit or two on some shelves. So if you've only got a couple of colonists with gear that lets them spacewalk, but not enough in storage for everyone to join in, visiting one of these wrecks will help you expand your expedition team by getting them the gear with the resistance they need to leave the ship, or actually board the ship and go into orbit if you've not yet installed oxygen pumps. While I do give this place some shit for being so massive and a pain to traverse and explore, it does have easily the highest density of things like components and steel boxes. I just need a mod that includes the open order in the architect menu. That way I could drag it across the whole map in one go, rather than needing to find each individual group of things that needs opening and toggling it on.
We are compassion.
The final quest aboard a platform involves bounty hunting. This will take you to a location just like an abandoned ancient platform, only now it's considerably less abandoned. Again, it's another solid chance to earn yourself an orbital base, so if you find that this quest lands in a relatively central location on your world with good access to other orbital locations, consider picking up enough resources to make a Grav Anchor before you visit here, as leaving to collect them is going to be more difficult once you've already touched down. There'll only be a handful of ancients awake when you first land at this site. If you hang around for too long without doing anything, or if you go and poke the bear, it will wake up the others from their caskets. Ideally, you want to be pushing fast while they're still affected with the sleep sickness debuff. You do need to be careful about the usual drones that will ruin your day for blindly charging into an unexplored room, however, so check corners as you go to avoid disaster. That's enough of platforms anyway, let's move on to some more natural structures. Starting with the orbital item stash. These are going to be small, unpressurized hideouts located within a mined asteroid, typically still guarded by drones, turrets and sentries. If you're getting tired of hearing that defender combo, believe me, it's even more tedious to have to face them time and time again when exploring these locations. You'll likely get into a pretty good rhythm when taking them down, but it's always a bit dangerous when one slip when entering a room can doom somebody when that corner camping hunter drone jumps straight at their face. These locations will always contain a unique weapon, making them a nice quick trip with a solid reward, on top of a few other crates and cases. Whilst exploring asteroids like this, it's also worth doing a little bit of strip mining, as you might find an Archean Tree hidden within the rock. If you get lucky and do uncover one, there's also normally a crate nearby that will contain a seed to go and plant your own, given that it can't be moved without destroying it. From asteroids with hidden bases, next we have asteroids with hidden materials, the ore-rich variety that will appear on your radar. These aren't quite as simple as turning up and instantly being greeted with a huge chunk of material in question though. You are going to need to strip mine to find the veins within the rock here. You never know though, you might also find something else hidden in the rock, like a buried room containing a cryptosleep casket. These locations are less of a 20-minute in and out adventure and more of a long-term endeavour. So if you only send a shuttle to reach these, you're going to want full vac suits on your colonists to avoid exposure and a good amount of meals. Ore-rich asteroids are better approached with your Gravship, but that doesn't mean they're worthless if you aren't using one. You just need to prepare for them is all.
Fuck.
That leads us into the standard locations that are always in space. Regular old asteroids are pretty plentiful, making for a useful stopping point if you're trying to reach a distant point of interest that you can't quite get to in a single jump. These will normally contain a very small amount of other materials too, with a high density of Vacstone. Just like the ore-rich asteroids or item stashes, if you go digging deep enough you do occasionally uncover a more interesting reward, but that takes a considerable amount of time. Fortunately, asteroids don't count as overhead mounting, so you're able to completely mine out the whole thing with enough time without risking any collapse, provided that you've been removing the ceiling as you go of course. The other location you can visit are the orbital trader platforms. These are heavily guarded with automated turret systems that will destroy your Gravship before you can even land if you're trying to approach it without a signal jammer. They do not want visitors, so they're only really accessible towards the back end of your Gravship construction efforts. If you wanted to get your own orbital platform that had no holes in the wall however, these places are begging to be stolen from the Trade Guild. You're going to have to fight pretty damn hard for it, with the bare minimum of gear that this faction will wear being vac suits and the standard being marine armour, as well as the usual traps waiting to jump out at you and turrets. It's certainly going to be a fight to take this place over. Then you also have to deal with the fallout of having upset the Traders Guild, as they'll cut off your access to passing orbitals and the raiders they send your way are rough. Honestly, you might get less than you expected for raiding this platform at times too, which is why I would value taking it as an orbital base rather than attacking these places for the loot that they may contain. The rewards are simply more reliable from other quest locations rather than purposefully attacking the Traders Guild. Now, one thing I haven't covered about living in space is what exactly happens in regards to raids heading your way. Of course, mechanoids can still attack you, but what about other factions? Well, if you live in space, you're going to get real familiar with the Salvagers. These are hidden in your list and are permanently hostile to basically everyone. Mainly made up of baseliners with some genies, starjacks and hussar thrown in for good measure. They'll be the ones throwing raids at your doorstep, landing in transport pods, wearing full recon, marine or even cataphract gear. Sometimes you get lucky and they put on a vac suit and waddle slowly behind their friends, but they're never to be taken lightly. So whilst living in orbit will remove a lot of threats from your game, the few that are going to remain are considerably more dangerous. I'd take a pack of 200 man-hunting squirrels over a raid from these dicks any day of the week.
Could we possibly make any more noise? I guess so.
That just leaves quests that generate that are directly related to your Gravship. These always come in with the reward of a Grav Core and Gravlite Panels. There are 8 possible repeatable quests that can generate and 1 endgame quest that is the goal of the Gravship, the Mech Hive. Fortunately, we've already covered quite a lot of what these quests are. It's just that they generate with different rewards when offered through this source. The insect lair is more involved than the infested settlement that we visited before, with this also including an entrance into an underground cave system, infested with insects, hives, and even hosting a queen. These underground layers work just like the pits did in Anomaly, meaning you can drop in and climb back out as needed to avoid the threats if things get a little bit overwhelming. They won't be able to follow you out to the upper level. If you play smart and start a lot of fires in multiple locations before opening up too much of that zone, it's easier to get the entire underground network to reach a critical temperature that will deal with a lot of the bugs and hives for you, so you can purge almost the entire system with minimal risk to your colonists. It might just need a little bit of help with some wooden furniture or straw matting. The higher HP of the piece, the better, as it's going to burn for longer. You'll also need to be especially careful down here if you're clearing it out as intended, with how the insect AI retaliates when you damage a hive, as it'll pull basically every threat that can reach you immediately to your position and potentially surround you. So keep your back towards the exit at all times when pulling packs in the event that things get a little bit too spicy. Once you're near to the Queen's lair, you're going to be warned about chittering on the other side of the wall, with the Grav Core and panels being guarded by her. The only thing to do now is bring down the wall, then rip and tear. For something that you can burn to the ground, to a site that's going to make you want to wrap up warm, the Frozen Terraformer. Regardless of the biome or the landscape that this quest appears in, the whole area is going to be under the effect of deep freeze, dramatically lowering the ambient temperature with a huge chunk of solid ice forming around the complex that houses the terraformer. This ice is completely safe to mine through, it has no roof above it whatsoever, and it's also fragile enough that some rather explosive excavation techniques can actually yield a fairly solid result. Once you manage to uncover the encased complex, it'll be immediately familiar to you, as we've already covered a lot of other quests with locations just like this one. Roaming sentries, drones, turrets, as well as unstable nodes, corridors blocked by ice that need to be broken through, and the odd hidden bit of loot here or there. You'll normally want to keep an eye out for a warm yellow glow that a sealed crate emits, as there's often an extra one or two tucked behind ice walls. The Grav Core that you're trying to locate at this location is housed within the terraformer itself, so you need to smash it to bits in order to claim your prize, with the panels being located in crates somewhere else in the facility. As soon as the terraformer's destroyed, the temperature begins to rise to normal in the zone again. Just be aware that whilst any snow that's fallen will be cleared with the zone warming up, the ice floors and solid ice walls aren't going anywhere. This isn't going to uncover the whole map for you. What else do we have on the planet's surface then? How about an ancient reactor site? This, much like the terraformer, is providing a constant negative effect in the surrounding area. With the reactor, it's toxic fallout, so you're fairly safe while staying inside your Gravship or exploring through the facility, but you don't want to be wandering around the map for no reason. It's another facility that's protected by automated defences. It's also usually pretty stacked with old generators, chem fuel canisters and fuel nodes, so be careful about face checking certain rooms. It could get rather bright pretty quickly. Again, just like the terraformer, the grav core is inside the reactor itself, and the panels are in a separate room, contained within crates. You can deal with the reactor in one of two ways, however, compared to the terraformer that just needed smashing. If you choose to beat the crap out of the reactor, it will eventually enter a meltdown state at 50% health, giving you enough time to back away before it explodes. Or, if you'd rather play it a little bit safer, you can hack the reactor with an intellectual skill of 6 or higher, taking 150 work to complete, with finishing this hack safely dropping the grav core on the floor besides the reactor. No big scary boom required, although that big scary boom can help in removing the threats that were corner camping inside the reactor itself. And if you blow it up, it also drops some additional grav panels. From the ancient reactor, now we have an ancient stockpile. This one is actually a little bit different. It uses the underground pocket dimension layer again, like the insect hive did. There will be 3 stockpile entrances at the location, each of which needs quite a lot of hacking to get open, requiring an intellectual skill of 4 and 650 points of progress to unlock the closed door. Occasionally during this hacking process, the colonist is going to be detected and kicked out of the system, locking down that particular door for around 8 hours or so before hacking can be resumed. The progress isn't reset, but it just makes it take even longer to complete. Each one of these stockpiles is also a unique location, so those 3 entrances above ground don't join up together on the underground layer. You have 3 stockpiles to explore, with one of them containing the reward that you presumably travelled here for, the grav core and panels, and the other 2 containing an assortment of useful loot. These underground areas are dark, often making it difficult to pick out hidden traps whilst exploring, so make sure you're zooming out fairly often to see if the bright red outline shows up to warn you of any danger. There might also be other dangers lurking down here too, like an insect hive, so don't get overconfident while mapping this place out. It's not just automated defences. Once you're finished checking out a stockpile, you can bring your loot to the surface by selecting the stockpile exit and hitting the button marked Exit Ancient Stockpile. This opens a menu similar to what you would get when creating a caravan, making it easy to transfer things from this underground layer to the main tile. Then you can carry it aboard your shuttle or grav ship and take it home with you. If you want to make it easy to know what stockpiles you've already cleared, you can also reseal them once you've finished. Just make sure you've brought everything to the surface that you want before doing this, because this choice is permanent. Time to mix it up a bit. We're still on the planet's surface, but now we have a mechanoid relay site. These are a little bit more involved than what we've dealt with before, as you won't be exploring through a building to grab your loot. You'll be expected to deal with some mechanoids here. The site spawns with 3 stabilizers and 1 relay, which could be hinting at what you'll need to do in a much later quest when you approach one of these relays early on into your Odyssey experience. Just like the reactor site, you have 2 options here, loud and fast or safe and long. Blowing up the stabilizers will summon mechanoid reinforcements, with each subsequent wave becoming stronger. So if you fight the first and find it pretty challenging, maybe don't push for violence on the second or third. Your other option requires an intellectual skill of 7, with each stabilizer needing 500 points worth of progress to completely hack it. Just like the stockpile sites, you can be locked out of these, but that's not going to trigger any kind of alarm for the mechanoids. You just need to wait and try again. Once all 3 stabilizers are dealt with, the relay itself is going to take 3 hours to fully destabilize. After that, it comes crashing down and it's finally vulnerable to attack. This 3 hours of waiting is here to prevent you from blowing up the final stabilizer with Team 1, smashing the relay with Team 2, and then hauling ass back to the grav ship with the core. You're going to need to get into some kind of fight, even if you didn't go the route of breaking the stabilizers. It's unavoidable, because for the final FU from the mechanoids, once you start to destroy the relay, they're going to send a final wave of reinforcements to try and stop you. Depending on where they land and how many of them there are, you might be able to wrap up smashing the relay, grabbing the loot, and just bailing on the site. So ideally make sure that the Grav Engine is charged before you start this final step. Fortunately, Gravlite Panels only weigh 1/4 kilogram each, so colonists can carry a full stack at a time, meaning 4 colonists is more than enough to haul all of the panels and the core. Just make sure they don't panic and run if they bump into a mechanoid on the way back to the stockpile. That was the mechanoid relay. What about a crashed mechanoid platform? This is the last planet-side quest to cover. Man, this section's been nuts. We already covered a mechanoid platform in the more general quest section, As you'd expect, the crashed section has an incredibly similar layout and features the same threats and structures, with the only real difference being you're no longer fighting against cold or vacuum exposure thanks to it being on the planet. You also realistically have more options in terms of baiting enemies out of the platform interior, as there's more room to manoeuvre around it, compared to the untraversable emptiness that is an orbital platform. These sites are often far more punishing in their sleeping mechanoid and dormant vac density too. I'm not sure if the calculation is that brutal because you're expected to have an easier time living on the tile whilst repeatedly assaulting the target or not, but it's unlikely that you'll be able to clear the entire thing in one clean sweep. Of course, thanks to it being planetside, you do have access to mortars, so if you wanted to lob an anti-grain or two through its ceiling, it'll make everything far easier to deal with. Just like many of the other sites, you'll find that the Gravlite Panels are stored separately to the Grav core, which is housed within an ancient Grav Engine. You'll need to smash that open in order to claim your prize. There's no real easy way to scout a platform like this, unfortunately. It's hard to tell what corner or section you'll be wanting to head towards at a glance, although breaking open a single tile of wall from a safe distance in each distinct room will give you a good idea of what sections to avoid like the plague.
I'm going to check if the coast is clear.
Is it clear?
No.
How many?
Lots.
Finally, let's go into orbit. We've got 2 more repeatable quest locations and then the mech hive itself. I might need to mention the new mechanoid introduced with this expansion too at some point. First up is the uncrashed version of the mechanoid platform, with its inclusion of the ancient Grav Engine for the quest. This really isn't that different. This is also where you're likely to notice that quest sites related to the Gravship are costed a little bit higher than those you will obtain from other means. When compared side by side to a standard orbital mech platform, this version is normally a little bit larger. It contains more pods and it has significantly more expensive mechanoid threats. So what might have previously been a few scythers, maybe a pikeman or two, and a scattering of militars, now you'll likely find you're looking at tesserons, scorchers, and the new Cyclops. So given that we already covered this quest site in both its crashed and standard form, let's talk about the new nasty. The Cyclops comes in as both a hostile mechanoid that you can face, and something you can craft yourself if you have the Biotech DLC, included with standard mech tech. It's probably the most dangerous mechanoid included at that level of Tech 2, as seen in its cost. It's crafted at the large gestator, and as such it uses a large recharger. Each Cyclops only costs 2 bandwidth though, and it's packing a beam repeater as its primary armament. Let's put that into context. The beam repeater, when made for a colonist, takes 40 plasteel, 30 steel, and 3 advanced components. If you spend 90 more steel, swap the 3 advanced components for 5 normal ones, and throw a subcore at it, not only do you get a beam repeater, you get something to wield it for you, and face tank. This thing is serious value. The only downside is that the Cyclops is surprisingly squishy, despite its somewhat large appearance, with about equal part health to something like a pikeman, but it's got nowhere near the kind of range that keeps a pikeman safe. That leaves it up to you if you want to have these supporting something like a scyther, as they almost have the speed to keep pace with them when charging into enemies, or if you'd rather have them supporting your own brawlers with saturation fire that gets to totally ignore enemy shields. Just make sure that your melee line isn't getting clipped by missed shots from these Cyclops, as they penetrate friendly shields too. All that leaves is the abandoned orbital platform then, which again we already covered a standard version of with a more general quest instead of a mech hive specific offering. These use the breach version of the habitat and they're normally filled with traps, sentries and turrets, far more so than you would find in a general quest location. Platforms like this can occasionally generate with a crashed shuttle around the exterior too, which gives you easy access to a shuttle engine. Always handy if you haven't yet been offered a crashing Imperial ship quest, or if you don't own royalty. This is another quest where you're looking to locate the ancient Grav Engine to break it apart for the core that it contains, but you might still find some locked cryptosleep caskets as well as furnished rooms that you can repurpose, and these sites also normally come with a couple of rooms packing a heap of mining charges too. Useful if you want to transport pod them over to a target before launching a mortar at it. Of course, this tactic's only going to work on the planet's surface. You'll need to sneak somebody in with a source of ignition to make use of that in orbit. That's it then. All that's left to cover now is the Mech Hive endgame. This is the other location that requires a signal jammer to approach. Without it, you're not going to be able to make the trip.
Gravtech!
The first thing you'll probably notice when landing here is the scale of this map. The mech hive is huge, housing what essentially amounts to 4 mechanoid platforms worth of structures, sitting on top of a substructure with the Cerebrex core located at the very centre. You're going to find lone buildings loaded up with stocked mech vats, turret emplacements protected by clusters of smaller mechanoids around the central location, 4 things known as mech hive birthers, which will passively produce new mechanoids to protect the core, meaning how you approach this is going to be down to what kind of setup you've arrived with. You can methodically clear building to building, which is going to be slow going and involve fighting off multiple waves of reinforcements that those mech hive birthers are producing. Once they reach around 12 or so in number, they move out and try and attack your grav ship. Working this way makes it far safer to travel around the platform and also allows you the opportunity to score more bits of loot before you try and finish the mech hive, with over a dozen hermetic crates located in the area, some of which may even contain unique weapons. You never know, a gun with EMP rounds could be in one of those boxes. Doing a methodical approach like this also lets you smash all of the vats as you go, so you're never going to be surprised by a mechanoid popping out in the middle of a fight and sneaking up behind you. Of course, the major downside to using this strategy, besides needing to deal with all of those waves that the core's going to send your way, is the amount of supplies that you'll get through by spending so much time here. The meds that you need to tend any wounds because you had to clear every threat, and all of the food that you'll be breezing through while spending multiple days on the platform. You either need a solid stockpile, and I mean potentially a quadrum's worth of food before approaching this place, or you need a completely sustainable grav ship with hydroponics, a sun lamp, the whole shebang. Your other option here is balls to the wall, pure smash and grab, which is going to be significantly more dangerous if you own biotech, as this place is going to be throwing war queens and even apocrytrons at you if you start bringing the boom. So maybe don't go for this strategy if you are using biotech. It's an all or nothing approach, and losing a run at this point is crushing. What you're here to ultimately deal with is the Cerebrex core, but it's protected by 3 stabilizers. Does that concept sound familiar to you? These stabilizers spawn inside the larger mechanoid complexes, with it being far easier to gain access to them by blowing a hole in the wall and checking the room. No stabilizer? Move on to the next one, try again. Walking through the corridors of these areas is asking to be caught out by mechanoids waking up and pinning you down in a tight space, where typically they'll have the advantage, as you won't be able to get a clear line of sight with your whole firing squad. There isn't an option to hack here either. You have to destroy these parts, which is going to cause a wave of reinforcements to hit you, and the waves that they send here aren't a pushover either. So, what is the plan with Smash and Grab? Simple. Eat up, dose up, head out, as a massive blob of firepower and leave a trail of destruction behind you. If the reinforcements land and head to your ship and start attacking it, who cares? That's more time for you to find the next stabilizer and destroy it. Worth noting that finding all 3 stabilizers before destroying any of them is the way to go with this method. That way you're avoiding breaking into the wrong room whilst reinforcements are beating the crap out of your only escape method. If the reinforcements come straight for you though, even better. That way you can take them down with an overwhelming force. Just do your best to bait them into a choke point so you're not caught up in melee or left wide open to pikemen. It's also a really good idea to make sure that the area around the Cerebrex core is as clear as possible before you start this endeavour too. The last thing you want to have to do is face down all of the turrets, reinforcements and the spawned mechanoids from birthers whilst trying to make it to your goal. So let's assume you've blown up the turrets, you've cleared whatever mechs it had birthed and whatever was in your way. You found all 3 stabilizers. What now? Well, this tactic is going to rely on going for one of the specific endings, with 2 being offered to you. So we're covering the destruction ending first, as it best suits this approach. You're going to split your colony into 4 squads in total. You need a group of 2 or 3 for each stabilizer, and every remaining colonist goes and chills at the core. The better you can balance the damage output across your stabilizer teams, the smoother this is going to go. Acting as one, the stabilizer teams open fire with the aim of destroying every stabilizer simultaneously. This is going to summon an absolutely hideous amount of reinforcements, but they're not your concern, because all you need is 15 uninterrupted seconds to inspect the core with a colonist that was waiting right beside it. The others are there to act as support, to help drop a low shield if needed to avoid any random shots taking out your colonist on inspection duty, and to help keep any melee mechs like Scythers well away from them. Once that 15 seconds are up, you now have the option to either destroy the core or scavenge the technology. If you've gone this route, you will want to destroy the core. If you do not pick this option, all of those mechanoids you just summoned will still be there when the credits stop rolling. With the destroy the core ending, the mechanoid threat is no more. This changes quite a lot more than just removing mechanoid raids too. Any existing hostile mechanoids are instantly disabled. They won't appear as dead, but they won't be able to act, meaning all of the crap that you just summoned to protect the Cerebrex core is now a lot of very fancy paperweights. Any mechanoids that you could summon, like if you had a mech cluster targeter from Royalty, will land deactivated. Any mechanoid clusters that are summoned from quests will appear with deactivated turrets and useless mechs. Mechanators will now struggle to progress as they can no longer summon in a threat, such as a Diabolus, War Queen or an Apocrytron. They won't somehow roll up to your base before deactivating and giving you free loot. You simply can't send a signal anymore. Any friendly mechanoids will continue to function, as your Mechanator is controlling them rather than the mech hive. However, if any of them go feral, they are instantly deactivated. So it's quite impactful going this route, but it is the easiest way to clear the endgame. Not only that, you'll be able to smash the destroyed Cerebrex core once you return to game and claim a whole heap of plasteel, advanced components and even a persona core. So it's quite easy to go for the rocket ending after achieving this.
I like it.
I know, it's great, right?
Another!
The other option is to scavenge the technology from the core, which leaves the mechanoid threat intact. Whatever hostiles were present before you finish that inspection will still be there on returning to your game. If you pick this ending, you are granted the Cerebrex node, an indestructible utility item. I'd suggest grabbing it and bailing on this platform as soon as possible, unless you did a very methodical clearing method and there are very few threats left. This ending is far preferable if you're using a Mechanator of your own, with the node providing 15 additional bandwidth and 12% mech work speed whilst equipped, making it easily the best utility item that they can use. As well as those handy offsets, it also comes with 3 abilities that can be fired as needed, with each one having just a 3-hour cooldown. These cooldowns are individual too, so using one ability doesn't time out the other 2. You get the ability to disable any mechanoid within a 30 tile range, taking just half a second to cast. This basically means that the big bad of the mechanoid group you summon in for chips is a total freebie, making the waves considerably easier when they aren't supported by their boss. You're also able to call in drop pods as and when you need, summoning a pair of mechanoid pods that work just like a transport pod, without any need for fuel. This makes it exceptionally easy to bounce around the world and claim resources, send gifts to other factions, or immediately leave a tile if things are looking rough. The cooldown is also low enough that you can start using this when you arrive somewhere and have a full colony's worth of pods ready by the time you need to leave. Finally, you get the option to summon mechanoids. These aren't friendly mechanoids, with it normally bringing in a group of around 8 to 10 depending on what's turned up. Whilst a group of this size isn't going to do much against a late game raid that's nearing the hundreds or even exceeding it, they do work fantastically as a distraction and they can be summoned at any distance provided there's a clear line of sight. So these are great for interrupting siege raids or taking care of a group for you when a raid turns up from multiple angles. They can also be used to bait out certain threats like sight stealers from Anomaly, or if you're feeling like a bit of a dick, you can drop these right on top of a trader and maybe get their loot. After all, it wasn't you that pulled the trigger, it was the mechanoids that landed on their head. You have a lot of options with this utility, just don't do something stupid like forget to put the Cerebrex core on your Gravship before you leave the mech hive, as you're never coming back.
I keep having this nagging feeling that I've forgotten something.
Hey, if you forgot it, it probably wasn't all that important.
Yeah, I guess.
So, how do I end up leaning with Odyssey? It's an incredible DLC. It's easily one of the most expansive, if not the most expansive, in terms of how much additional lifespan this is going to add to the game. But, perhaps strangely to some, it still isn't what I'd recommend someone new to the game picks up first, for a few different reasons. Let's cover how I'd personally value a DLC purchase first to try and add some context to this take. With an official DLC, what I want is something that's going to meaningfully impact every colony that I play. It doesn't have to completely overhaul every single run, it just needs to provide something of value to whatever ridiculous concept I've come up with. So, would I use a grav ship in every run? No. Would I settle on one of the new biomes in every run? No. But the landmark system's going to give me a lot more to think about when settling my colony, as will map features. At the same time, I'm going to have a much wider variety of animals present wherever I do end up picking. There's going to be more quests available for me to undertake, and thankfully I don't need to use a grav ship to interact with them. A shuttle, or even transport pods in some cases, is more than enough. I'll find or be offered unique weapons that might make every run a little bit different, depending on how lucky or unlucky I got with the roll. It doesn't need to be a big bombastic thing every single time. It just needs to offer the flexibility, and it needs to be noticeable, not background noise. With those thoughts around parts being noticeable and adding to every single run in mind, Biotech's still ahead of Odyssey in terms of how it's improved my game on a play-by-play basis. I'm not always using the Mechanator, I don't always have pregnancy or kids enabled, I don't always dabble with gene editing or play with sanguiphages or use death rest, but the threats that I face will be far more varied because of the new foundation to content that Biotech added. With that in turn meaning that the recruits I'm capturing are more interesting and unique. So even if I barely touch a DLC specific research project or structure, I still get to make solid and consistent use out of what Biotech added every single run. Odyssey falls very close to Biotech in this, but I still give the edge to Xenotypes and Mechanoids over the inclusion of the Orbital layer, map additions and the quest system expansion. Now, what else I consider when recommending a DLC is how friendly it is to new players. There's a reason I always suggest to newcomers that they should probably play the base game for a few hundred hours before needing, in big air quotes, to buy any DLC. There are a whole lot of mechanics to learn and all kinds of different things to experiment around with, without any need to have additional content enabled whilst doing so. If anything, having more content enabled whilst trying to learn the base game mechanics is going to make it significantly harder to understand. A lot of people who are in the hundreds or even thousands of hours club might forget just how much information this game throws at a new player, and just how little that tutorial actually does to prepare you for anything outside of the most simple mechanics and interactions. It's why the subreddit and Steam discussion page has the same 10 or so questions repeated every week. Why doesn't this heater work? And it's an image of a cooler pointed the wrong way round. Now imagine being new to the base game and Odyssey at the same time. Here's your grav ship. Make sure you build it as efficiently as possible because you're really limited on space. Make sure you manage your colony wealth very carefully as you won't have tried and true defences like a static base. Make sure you don't land on certain quest sites as reinforcements will be triggered and you'll die long before the ship's ready to launch. Oh, you landed in that biome? Yeah, you won't find any wood there, have fun trying to take off again. There's a lot of points to make some really horrific mistakes with Odyssey that will instantly doom your run or make it incredibly tedious for a few in-game days while you rectify the problem that you just created. As well as there being this kind of unspoken understanding that you already know what you're supposed to be doing before you live on a floating base, much less a standard one. I could really see this DLC leaving a somewhat sour taste in a new player's mouth if all they wanted to do was fly their ship around in space for a bit, without realising how deep they would need to get into the tech tree and how many systems they need to understand and have correctly functioning on a grav ship for it to be completely self-sustainable in orbit, as well as all the mechanical knowledge going into that to make it work as efficiently as they want. But here we have the total flip side to that argument, because I'm well aware that it exists. Odyssey gets exponentially harder with every other DLC you own. If you own royalty and want to go the route of honour, good luck keeping people happy whilst they climb the hierarchy with their demands for expensive meals and large bedrooms. You have both extremely limited floor space and you lack reliable access to soil and animals. Ideology is going to have some memes that you might pick that have requirements that are a nightmare to manage. From something like Transhumanist with its excessive demand for power and floor space hungry structures, to nudism spacefaring colonists depressed because they aren't allowed to exit the airlock with their floppy bits slapping around getting vacuum burns. Kinky. Biotech is by far the biggest offender in this though. Sanguiphages need death rest rooms, Mechanators require gestation pods, workbenches, all kinds of power. Not only that, all of the dangerous improved mechanoids that Biotech features are now fighting against you if you want to interact with the Mech Hive questline, making it more challenging. Plus, raising kids is already hard enough. It's even more difficult in friggin' space. If you own Anomaly and you wanted to conduct any kind of meaningful void study to progress through the research tree, have fun building the event Horizon. I'm sure it'll end really well when the cosmic horror escapes containment and causes all kinds of breaches across your ship. So, I'm fully aware that what I just stated about picking up Biotech first being the right choice, while also saying that Biotech makes some of the hardest changes to Odyssey, is counterintuitive. How does that work? It's honestly going to depend on the player and how they're approaching Rimworld. It always is. I do firmly believe that you'll get more of an improvement to your overall gameplay by purchasing Biotech, with it offering a much wider variety of new mechanics, many of which are more accessible to players that aren't super confident in the nitty-gritty knowledge of the game. On the other hand, if a player is new to Rimworld but really familiar with games like Dwarf Fortress or Oxygen Not Included, it probably won't be hard to translate that knowledge over and make pretty quick sense of what Odyssey requires from you. This, of course, is said with the huge caveat that I'm speaking from my own experience. I played the game on Losing is Fun with a handful of quality of life mods. If you're a player that vibes with Community Builder or Adventure Story, you probably won't feel as much pressure from ignoring wealth management, and you can build whatever ship you want. But if you normally use a difficulty setting of Strive to Survive or above, and sometimes find it gets a bit tricky, I can see Odyssey throwing more than 1 or 2 spanners in the works during a run. Having mentioned mods, that does play into any recommendation I'm going to give too. It's unavoidable with such a massive modding scene for the game. Biotech already has a wealth of compatible mods on the workshop that expand on every system that it's included. So does Ideology and Royalty. Anomaly was the black sheep of the family, with relatively few creators wanting to make mods that really utilise it. Of course, Odyssey is a new release, so specific mods for it are pretty sparse at time of recording, but it has easily the potential of something like Biotech in terms of what can be made for it, as well as having the highest amount of hype from the community that is likely going to encourage creators to get involved in designing new things for it. I expect we'll see many new orbital locations to visit, new ship mechanics and systems to play with, quests that can make use of your ability to travel far greater distances. So whilst Odyssey might be light in a very basic sense of what it adds to your architect menu, it's a perfect framework for others to build off. Much in the same way that when Biotech released Xenotypes, there was a handful of possible choices, but now you can easily fill a list with 2 or even 3 dozen different Xenotypes, just by using vanilla expanded and alpha mods, not even counting other fantastic additions like Debts, Ruse or Sovereigns. With that in mind, if you're in the situation where you picked up the base game and you can afford to buy a new DLC every month or two, because I get it, finances are rough for some people right now, and even thinking about throwing £90 to get a single game's entire DLC catalogue isn't viable at all. I would recommend grabbing another DLC first whilst the modding scene for Odyssey finds its feet. That way you've got a wealth of content on the workshop to explore in the time between purchases. And when you do get Odyssey, it'll have some funky additions ready to go, and you'll be far more settled with existing mechanics before needing to try and translate that knowledge over to working in space. For a TLDR, or a TLDL, it's fantastic. Do not skip this DLC. It's going to reignite your love for the game if you've not played for a while. However, if you are new to playing Rimworld, there are other DLC that might be more friendly towards you whilst you're learning the game, and provide you with more flexibility in trying different colony ideas. Odyssey is something you can work towards rather than jumping right in at the deep end with it. The last thing I want to do is overpromise on what Odyssey will deliver for you and leave you feeling like you're drowning in mechanics, as it's a surefire way to make people stop playing the game and never pick it back up again. Lord knows I've done it with enough titles, I say whilst angrily glaring at my copy of Battle Brothers. Anyway, that about does it. If you would like to see what I'm working on and get insights into upcoming projects, it's all available to view on my Patreon page. All the posts there are free to read, but if you would like, you can support me in producing content like this for just £1 a month. It gets your name in the credits of these videos and it helps me to stay alive. Thanks for watching, folks. If you have any mods you would like to see a full breakdown for, or suggestions of mods you would like to see covered, feel free to leave them in the comments, I might get around to them. I'll be back again soon with another Rimworld mod rundown. Wherever you are in the world, enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening. Take care.
I need a vacation.